Accessing agent files. Brian Sovryn. Early 21st century anarchist. Creator and host of the podcast Sovryn Tech. By the year 2021, the show would be instrumental in the downfall of various conservative ideologies in the government, helping usher in an incredible time.
Hey, want to take a walk on the wild side and experience the bleeding edge of technology? Then get ready, because it doesn't get much more edgy than this. You're in for a wild ride. You're listening to Sovryn Tech with your host, the man in triple black, the Golden Stallion of the tech world, Brian Sovryn. He's got a huge brain. And now here's Brian.
That's right, the master of the triple black arts, the Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, here for another special Merry Encryptmas, everybody. Did I say that right? I love that. I don't know. Somebody made a hashtag on Twitter. It said Encryptmas. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. So anyway, yeah, this is going to be a part. I'm going to release a few episodes this week. I'm not one to celebrate Christmas, but I'm certainly game for celebrating a little Saturnalia, little Bacchanalian festivities. And, with that in mind, you get to, take advantage of that. The Sovereignty get to hear a whole slew of Sovryn Tech. So we'll have this out there along with some other episodes this week. But this is actually, I was a guest on Non-Partisan Liberty for All. And this is a blog talk radio show being done by Dave Bourne. And I really like his style. He definitely keeps things on track and, really has a lot of great questions. And he's getting a lot of great guests out there. Not saying that I'm great, just saying that he gets tons of great guests on his show. He's had Ian Freeman, Mark Edge. He's had people, that are really doing very serious, active things to help, very much change the world. And I was, very graciously asked to be on his show. And it was a 3-hour show, so you got a lot of content here if you want to check it out. But I had a good time. He had a lot of great questions. I talked quite a bit about my military career, as well as, getting out of that, my path towards liberty. And then we even got into some, broader tech subjects that I think deserve some exploration, and I was happy to do it with Dave. He was really just a great host. So do check this out. Do enjoy it, and there will be more specials as well coming out this week. A lot of Sovryn Tech content. We'll see how much we can knock out for the new year, and then 2015, boy, it's going to be the year of System D, I'll tell you that. Anyway, Carpe Lucem, everybody. I'll let this ride right out with the music. I won't be coming back at the end. But I'll see you on the other side in the other specials this week, along with the regular episode of Sovryn Tech.
Non-Partisan Liberty for All. I'm your host, Dave Bourne, and it is December 17th, Wednesday, December 17th, 2014, and I am coming to you live from Las Vegas. As I had talked about or mentioned yesterday, I've gotten some new equipment, although I'm not using my new microphone yet, because I don't want that to fuck up, especially the next 2 nights when I have some important guests on. Well, to me, every guest is important, so not to say that the guests that are coming on are not as important. Everybody's important, just whatever. But anyway, I did try to test my new microphone last night, and it didn't give me the results I was looking for, so I'm going to retest that this weekend, and I don't want to have any issues regarding my guests that are going to be on the next 2 days. But I was able to set up my microphone stand, which is nice, and now I have my mic kind of coming down as opposed to being on the table. It's, coming down right towards my mouth like you would see in a studio. It looks good. I don't know if it's going to improve my sound any, but it does look cool. So I have to take some pictures of that, of me sitting at my new little office/studio, and post those on the Facebook page. But thank you for tuning in to Non-Partisan Liberty for All Radio. We're on weeknights at 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern, and promote the ideas of true freedom and liberty, meaning having the freedom to do what you want as long as you respect the freedom of others and allow them to be free and don't directly interfere with their freedom, as well as exposing government for what it is, a mafia gang that rules without consent by threat of force. So as I mentioned, we have guests the next 2 days. Tonight's guest, former Sunday Free Talk Live co-host and host of Sovryn Tech, Free State Project member, and liberty activist Brian Sovryn will be joining us. So I'm excited about having Brian on tomorrow. As I've been mentioning, I guess for the past 2 weeks, Dave Bourne of the Detroit Threat Center will be joining us. The Detroit Threat Center, of course, is a alternative to the police. They're you can call them a security company, although to me they're totally different than any security company I've ever heard of. They focus on de-escalation of violence and the safety and protection of their clients, not even with security guards, you have a lot of these wannabe cops, and unfortunately I run into them, or it seems like on a daily basis. I mentioned that, a couple of weeks ago, coming into work, I was targeted, I guess, by a security guard because they didn't say anything to anybody else. They didn't say anything to me, but they had sent one of their goons upstairs to look around, and then they realized, oh, I'm actually supposed to be here, and they left. But just a lot of times you run into these security guards that are just as bad as cops. At least they don't have the same power, which is a positive thing, but it's totally different with the Detroit Threat Management Center, where it's all about putting the lives of others first and protecting people and keeping them safe without using lethal force or as well as trying to de-escalate the situation. So that's, to me, a template for how police can be replaced, at least government police. And they do not call themselves police either. They do not have the same government backing and rights and privileges that police have, obviously. So they can't just go around shooting people without repercussions there. They don't have any extra rights that a normal person would have, and that's how it should be. So I'm really happy to have Dave Bourne on tomorrow. I have a lot to talk to him about. So what I'm going to do now is take a quick break. Again, Brian Sovryn, former Sunday co-host of Free Talk Live, as well as host of Sovryn Tech, which is, I think what Brian's doing is pretty cool in that you have most of the Liberty shows, I mean mine included, focus more on, government and the things that government is doing and injustices and how we can have a voluntary society and things like that. So to have different types of shows out there that are liberty, from a liberty perspective, but at the same time don't necessarily focus just on government per se, I think is a positive thing. So Brian, I guess and we'll talk to him about this, but from what I understand, I mean, he was one of those kids that, kind of self-taught, was always into computers and got some training in the military as well, and does a lot of stuff. I know he's had his own businesses, and I don't know exactly what he's doing now, whether he's doing more freelance stuff or it's pretty much your own business, I guess. So we'll ask him a little about that as well. But he follows everything that's going on as well regarding technology, and it's definitely something that you need to be aware of, not just from the standpoint of keeping up with technology and, what's the newest, coolest thing, because that's not really, from what I understand, the focus there. It's more, looking at not only the technology that the government's using against everybody, but also ways to combat it, like ways to try to protect yourself from the surveillance state. I mean, if that's really possible, at least to an extent, and things like that. So it's good that there's more liberty media, which is not a lot, but I think the more the better of liberty media that's liberty-oriented or from a liberty perspective, but is not necessarily focuses on how to achieve liberty or government or, all of these things that are going on. Because, again, my show included, there are a lot of podcasts out there or shows or different YouTube media or whatever that focus upon that. So we are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will have Brian on the line, and we'll talk to him again all about his journey to liberty, what's going on with him, as well as a number of issues regarding technology, and to get his perspective and his opinion on that. So it should be an interesting show. If you again want to listen to any of the archives, I was going to say if you've missed any of the show, but that hasn't happened yet because the show just started. But if for some reason you must tune out and you want to listen to the show later, you can listen to the archives at blogtalkradio.com/nonpartisan liberty for all or on iTunes. So we will be right back after this. Nonpartisan Liberty for All Radio.
Final robotic Olympic event, the obstacle course. On your marks.
Well, I got down. Now can I get up?
Get set.
The day of living like the Jetsons, mechanized made and all, gets closer all the time. Here are 10 great robots, some of which are even available to the public. Number 10. Honda's Asimo. The humanoid robot stands a bit over 4 feet and weighs in at 119 pounds. But its developers have packed a whole lot of functionality into its modest frame. Asimo can do sign language, play soccer, and even serve drinks. Number 9. Karatis. If you ever dreamed of being the pilot of a great big robot, this is your chance. Located within its 13-foot-tall frame is enough room for an onboard commander. Oh, by the way, it can be controlled with an iPhone. Number 8. Atlas. Commissioned by the Pentagon and engineered by Boston Dynamics, this disaster rescue dynamo is built to perform the heroic task of saving lives without risking its own. Number 7. Termite robots. These little guys are designed to do tough, tedious building work, and their way of working was inspired by termites. The bots assess their environment, take cues from one another, and get to work even though they haven't a clue of the bigger plan. Number 6. Cheetah Cub. Wanting to know how to make robots take control of tough terrain with the grace of a feline, scientists at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology made a robotic cat. Using it, they can assess joint force and agility without having to harm an actual animal. Number 5. Wildcat. Not to be confused with the aforementioned Cheetah Cub, the Wildcat is the newest generation of Boston Dynamics' Cheetah robot line. These machines are made for speed, traveling up to 29 miles per hour. While previous versions were indoor sorts, this one is suited to run free. Number 4. The Go Virtual Student. Stuck at home with a severe immune disorder, a student in Texas is now able to attend classes thanks to a robot. She can power the virtual version of herself via internet and participate in what's going on thanks to a webcam.
Miranda suffers from a weak immune system that doesn't allow her to attend class in person, but thanks to this robot pilot program, she's back in the classroom.
Number 3. RoboFly. It's tiny and fast, weighing only 80 milligrams and flapping its wings up to 120 times per second. Once technology advances and can make it a battery small enough, the robotic insect is predicted to be a helpful tool in search and rescue missions. Number 2. The Mab. It flies around your house, senses where it's dirty, and then deploys a bunch of tiny little cleaning bots to make the area sparkle. It's just a concept, but was enough of one to win the Electrolux Design Lab competition. Number 1. Curiosity. NASA's Mars rover has accomplished far more than any other robot can imagine, so to speak. It's only been on the red planet for about a year and a half, but has already determined that there could have once been life there. If you could design a robot, what would you make it do?
There's a service for that. It's called blogtalkradio.com. And they will, for free, they will give you a 30-minute broadcast of your own. You just call up this thing, and you can just talk for 30 minutes and see how many people call you, because nobody's going to be listening. Right. The people are listening to this program. It's on over 160 radio stations because we try to keep things moving around here. And,
by the way, I'll be on a Blog Talk Radio show tonight after the program's over.
There you go.
Well, it's a really good one.
One of our listeners actually has his own show, and he actually had Daryl on. It's Dave from Nevada.
Yeah.
He had Daryl on, and I thought he was a really great interviewer.
Yeah,
when he was talking with us.
I think I was just on with him. Is that Non-Partisan Liberty for All?
Yeah.
Or what? Yeah. So I was actually just on there too.
Global controls will have to be imposed, and a world governing body will be created to enforce them. Crises precipitate change.
Secretly plotting your demise. I want to devise a virus to bring dire straits to your environment. Crush your corporations with a mild touch. Trash your whole computer system and revert you to papyrus. I want to make a super virus strong enough to cause blackouts in every single metropolis. Cause they don't want to unify us, so fuck it. Total anarchy and can nobody stop us.
Non-Partisan Liberty for All, and we are back. If you like the show, you can follow us on Twitter. I always have to make sure the follow on Twitter and the like on Facebook. So you can follow us on Twitter at NP Liberty for All, and you can like us on Facebook at Non-Partisan Liberty for All. And my new page, And the Government Police, which is also the name of the Thursday show. So tomorrow tune in for And the Government Police Thursday. But like us on Facebook, it's basically a page dedicated to alternative ways to protect people and keep people safe, as opposed to ones backed by government and extra rights. And again, tomorrow, Dale Brown of the Detroit Threat Management Center will be joining us, and that is a alternative, I think, that can be used around the country. And I know Dale is trying to expand also, so hopefully they will be able to continue to expand, as the business started with just him and a dog and a shotgun. So also check them out on YouTube at the Detroit, enter Detroit Threat Management Center, and you'll see all the videos that Pete Eyre of Cop Block put together. So as I had mentioned at the beginning of the show, our guest today that I'm happy to have with us is Brian Sovryn, former Sunday co-host of Free Talk Live and current host of Sovryn Tech, which is as I had mentioned before the break, a liberty-oriented or a technology show from a liberty perspective. I guess, Brian, would that kind of describe it?
Yeah, that's perfect. I like that.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you on.
Yeah, Dave. No, it's great to be here. This is cool.
So the first thing I wanted to ask you, of course, one of the things that I always like to do when I have people on, Liberty people, which is usually who I have on when I have people on, but it's to find out, how they found the ideas of liberty, because it's something that it's if you're looking for it, it's easy to find. I mean, with the internet and everything. So if you're looking, yeah, it's easy to find, but it's not something that you're going to learn in school or you're going to hear usually from talking to friends or family or something like that. So I definitely wanted to get into that. But the first thing I wanted to ask you, I know one of the things that you would say on the Sunday show on Free Talk Live is how you and your girlfriend Stephanie are anarchists, and I like to stay away from labels. If you, I guess, look at the definition is without rulers, and if I really want to, I guess, label myself, I like voluntarist or voluntarist better, sure, just because it doesn't have that same connotation. But I guess, yes, you could say I'm an anarchist. I just like to stay away from that definition because, again, you have media and, even with recently you had the movie The Purge Anarchy, which is, everybody's out there killing everybody, and that's literally what they're doing in the movie. So how would you, what would be your definition, I guess, of anarchist, and to summarize what your perspective on government is?
Sure. I can really understand that where, because, and it seems like almost every word, every ism, one tries to go to, it generally is, co-opted, or it's certainly strayed far from, its original meaning. And anarchism, is just that. The first time the word was used was by a guy named Proudhon, who, and this was, over 200 years ago, and it was just pretty much getting rid of hierarchies. in all of their forms. And that's really it for me. Now, I mean, that doesn't mean that there isn't some kind of, social structure, but it does mean that there isn't a pyramid of power. It means that the pyramid has been leveled. And that's really it. What that takes shape as, that's as varying as the stars in the sky. So, right. It's difficult. I understand like that desire to not want to be labeled, because at the same time, I mean, labeling suddenly does kind of constrict you, it seems. But anarchy, being an anarchist, I like to think is the anti-label, to where, there is no clear-cut definition to be had. It's merely what works as long as it doesn't hurt anybody.
Right. And same, voluntarism is basically the same concept as well.
Sure.
And from what I understand, even the word itself, I guess, is, I forget what language it was from, but it actually means without rulers, from what I understand. Yeah, that's what it was.
Right.
I think I forget who I heard say that, but yeah, that it actually just means, the word itself even means without rulers. But yeah, as you said, I mean, so many definitions are corrupted. Even you look at libertarianism, I don't even know what that is, because you have Republicans going around saying, "Oh, I'm a libertarian." So it's kind of crazy there. So, in your story, I guess, is different and definitely interesting in how you came to the ideas of liberty. And it's good to talk to people, because everybody's story, for the most part, is different. But from what I understand, it was you, I guess, would you say that 9/11 was probably the biggest event prior to, of course, you finding liberty, up until that time in your life that influenced you?
It really did. It created a literal 180, the whole shtick. It really did. And obviously it did for a lot of people. But, it's interesting, because I hear from a lot of liberty-minded people that 9/11 is what woke them up to the dangers of the government, because, you have truthers and you have these people, that think, well, it's an inside job, all this stuff, and then whatever, But I was actually the exact opposite. To where
that's
I was
a pretty kind of, that a lot of people, it woke them up, and for you at the time, it did the opposite there.
Yeah, it really did. It actually it shut me down. It turned me into an arch statist, because what I encountered, now I was raised, I'm ethnically Jewish, and I was, raised Jewish up until my parents actually converted to Christianity later in life. And so, of course, all the kids converted with them. But anyway, I had, I'm from New York, and, you have that kind of the trope of, these large Jewish families and whatever, and I certainly had that. And when 9/11 occurred, it was 2001, so I was 19, 20, so 20 years old around there, and I had family that were actually in in the World Trade Center, that were in those buildings, and they died, on that day, and it wasn't necessarily, certainly, to what degree, how close they were to me, whatever. It's not like a brother and sister dying. Certainly, I understand all that kind of statements, but. Essentially, I'm hanging out in New York after that, in New York City, and I encountered at one point, a lot of these truthers who were making some pretty outlandish claims. I mean, if one wants to complain about the government or whatever, freedom of speech, that rock and roll, go for it, But they were making claims that Jews took the day off, that Jews were behind the 9/11, the incident of 9/11, and there was a whole lot of that. And first off, the idea that they took the day off was ridiculous, because I had, Jewish family that died. How could they have taken the day off?
Well, it's a ridiculous concept, but when someone says that about any people that have the same religion or race or whatever, that every Jew they all called each other, all millions of them, and said, hey, because and I had mentioned to you off the air that my father's side of the family is Jewish, and my father grew up 100% Jewish and bar mitzvah and all that stuff, but you get a call oh yeah, hey, we're blowing up the World Trade Center,
don't
just
show
to
up.
let you know, make sure you get everybody out, that's the So,
right.
it's just a crazy idea in itself.
Yeah, not that I had the wherewithal at the time, but I mean, really, anytime somebody is laying out any kind of collectivism, I think one should be concerned about what message is getting said to you. Because, I mean, there's no way that something is 100% true all of the time, you know, in that regard, when it comes to people. So I encountered that, and it actually ended up, you know, pretty much me getting in a screaming match in the middle of New York over the matter. And, I walked away pretty bitter. I was already having a real sense of, and talking to a lot of my family, having a real sense of, wanting some revenge, not just because of what happened, to my family members, but in large part also what happened to America, because, I was still kind of fresh out of high school, and, you have that patriotism that gets indoctrinated, that gets slammed upon you. And then there's the double whammy of hearing how Israel's next, and Israel's in danger and all this stuff. And, that has to mean something to you when you get brought up that way. Even if you convert to Christianity later, it doesn't really go away. And so, so I ended up, joining the military. I joined the U.S. Army in 2002. And because for a multitude of reasons. One is I wanted to kind of prove my patriotism and prove those people standing on the street saying that the Jews took the day off. I wanted to prove them wrong. No, we fight for this country, and I also, just wanted some straight up revenge, quite frankly. And it sickens me for me to even admit that, honestly, to
but I
this
think
day.
a lot of people initially, didn't go out and join the military, but kind of still had those type of thoughts or those, because I think just the emotional side of it, regardless of whether you were supportive of government at the time or not, you being anybody, it was something that nothing like that had ever happened before. So I think regardless of what was in people's mind even at the time, I think it had an effect on the majority of people, and that type of effect, like that anger, whether it's, regardless of who it's projected at, and of course a lot of people, it's the Middle East and, go blow them up. But just the fact that, whether you knew people or not, that people felt close to others and felt, and part of it is basically what you're saying as well. It's that whole indoctrination. But I think it went beyond that, and that's, to me even adds more to the, what did government have to do with it? Not to get into a whole conspiracy thing, but it worked very well to do some things that I think, regardless of what people think about 9/11, it was definitely exploited to push an agenda which seemed to have existed even before 9/11. So whether they just exploited it or, they happened to, here's the event we've been waiting for and exploit it, or they had something to do with it. I mean, there is that side of it as well. So it definitely did what they either intended from being involved in it, or were waiting for, we need an event to push this agenda.
Sure. Well, I mean, you take into account something like Rahm Emanuel said a few years ago, where you never let a good crisis go to waste.
Right.
And so regardless of whoever's involvement, they did not let this, they, them, those, the government did not let this crisis go to waste. That's for sure. Certainly. So, but, after... I ended up joining the military, after that, and was involved. I served over in Baghdad, quote unquote served. I hate using that word, but it just kind of comes out when you're describing it. But went over to Baghdad, 2 tours in Afghanistan, and ended up actually traveling the world pretty good. I was initially in for communications, but it was communications that were pretty decent on the front lines. So I saw plenty of, in-your-face stuff while I was over there. Later on, I ended up getting into, I was promoted, quote unquote, into psychological operations. And even that, even though that's more or less, when you're psychological operations in the U.S. Army, that is you're a propaganda man. You're supposed to be going around in every country and making the indigenous people think that you're the good guys. So in a way, you're kind of a professional liar, okay? Because I don't recall really anywhere where because especially with a job like that, it would be so easy to say, well, no, we're Americans, we really are the good guys. And but no, it is a very elaborate amount of things you have to do: radio, movies, television, pamphlets, magazines, newspapers, whatever medium is around. You have to really put a very serious spin on even the most mundane actions, that the U.S. military is doing. And so I was. Go ahead.
Oh no, sorry. Go ahead. I'll jump in.
Oh, I was just going to say. I mean, and that's what I was. That's what I was doing. But even though you would think that that's kind of a backseat job, that certainly still had plenty of situations that were very uncomfortable as far as a battlefield goes, even when you're in PSYOPs.
And one of the other things, of course, that brings up, that's just one part of the government, and I'm sure beyond what you were doing, there were plenty of other things going on even within the military itself that related to those type of things. But then you think about it, and I don't think a lot of people do, that I'm sure applies to every aspect of government, that they have these people that go out there and push propaganda and manipulate things. And, even like when you look at, they'll talk about campaigns and they'll test, this word works and this doesn't. Just that being applied to everything you can think of. And a lot of it's so obvious to see, like we just talked about 9/11 and exploiting an event. But I think it goes so much deeper than that, and people don't even think about it, whether it's, the media, TV, or commercials or school or whatever, and that the type of things that you were doing, that there's, probably thousands of other people that are doing the same thing and maybe more in all levels of government, not just the military.
Yeah, and it's something, this isn't, it's important, I think, to get this out there, because I think a lot of people feel that kind of business that the military or that the government does is somehow new. It's not. People don't recognize that narrative really is everything. In fact, I dare say narrative is 90% of the war, or 90% of the power that any group holds over another. And this is not new to America, in my opinion, because when you consider that George Washington himself said that, the Revolutionary War wouldn't have been won without the pen of Thomas Paine. Now, what he's talking about is the narrative that Thomas Paine set, with books like Common Sense and Rights of Man, all that kind of stuff. And so this is not new. War has always been done this way, and America, it's a tough pill for people to swallow, but America has been, doing psychological operations and controlling the narrative for a very, very long time. Since its
inception, yeah.
Yeah.
Even,
arguably.
It's just like, looking at the Constitution and for people to think, they just started, breaking it with Bush or something. But then you go back to the same thing, Washington and Whiskey Rebellion. They started breaking the Constitution as soon as they started it. And, of course, even to implement it in the first place, going from, basically throwing out the Articles of Confederation is pretty much what they did, right, to implement the Constitution. So it's, when you look at government, and I think that's why a lot of people sit there, you have a certain amount of people that just say, well, if we just went back to the Constitution and got the good people in, everything would be okay. But those are the people that I think are looking at it more from the perspective of, this is recent, or maybe it's, 30 years or 40 years. But they don't look at it as, well, this is a aspect of government. And, government corrupts and government's oppressive just in its very nature, and just trying to say, this just happened now. But maybe it gives people hope somehow that, we just get those good people in there and everything will be good. But the reality is, it's not going to make a difference.
No, it's definitely not. And government's nature is to just spread and grow. And it'll do that either, and generally it always does it by force. And so, to be in the military, when I was in the military, I got to discover what that force looked like firsthand. And it was pretty integral to my path to liberty. It was pretty integral to me having a strong foundation of principles. Not that I think anybody should have to go through really traumatic periods to be able to have a strong foundation or to be able to have a strong voice against the atrocities of governments, and of evil people wherever they may be. But at the same time, it was definitely really key for me to do that. And in the military, I got to the point. It's not a comfortable subject for me to ever totally talk about. But pretty much when people ask what happened, the bottom line comes down to is I killed a lot of people. Many of them I think were absolutely innocent, and I got to the point where I said no more. I can't do this anymore. And that's where you get a conscientious objector status, and it's not an easy thing to go through, and you get a lot of hazing for having a principled stance and saying you no longer agree with wars. And it's conscientious objector in the military. This is possible. They're really insidious about this because they don't want you to know that there's ways to get out.
Can you talk whatever you feel comfortable or you can say about just the concept of getting out of the military and what you have to go through to use the conscientious objector to get out? I'm mispronouncing it there. Conscientious.
Yeah. So it wasn't actually, there was a unilateral UN, United Nations charter or, amendment, whatever they want to call that, law that got laid out that, that said that people have to kind of allow for this. But that, even though there's that unilateral law that's recognized in Geneva and at any accord you go to, whatever, each country, as I understand it, is very different. And in the United States Army, it is possible to get out as a conscientious objector, but you have to, they put you through degrees of psych testing because they want to know that you really feel this way, and the other point is that when you make that statement, you have to be saying you're against war in its entirety. You're not just against this war, or you didn't just suddenly, change your mind, but you've got it. What they try to prove is that you are absolutely against all war as it exists and as it stands, and the military will humiliate you. I'm going to say that necessarily I went through a lot of this, but I knew other guys that had. They will do what they call pink vesting, where you will be going around the base wearing a bright pink vest, and that is a warning that you are. Usually, that means either you're on suicide watch, as in you might be suicidal, or that you are potentially psychotic or whatever the case may be. So that's, even though you're not actually coming to your senses and that you don't want to kill human beings anymore, they treat you like somehow you're a danger.
Yeah, you must be nuts because you don't want to kill people. It
right.
Obviously should be the opposite.
Yeah, it's so funny because you should be the one getting the medal, not the one getting put on a pink vest on you. So there's a lot. There's almost like a degree of hazing. There's a lot of insults that get passed around. It's in no way a comfortable situation. You are dealing with the scorn of your peers that you have, may have been in life and death situations with. But it is possible to get out. You don't have to go AWOL. I mean, you can if you want, but you don't have to do that. But that's how that goes. It can take, the amount of time that can take. It can take weeks. It can take months before you get sent home. But you can get out of the military. That is such an important message to get out to people because they think that they're stuck and they're not. And I also, that's the thing too, is that if you can, a lot of people, I've had people call into Free Talk Live when I was a host on Free Talk Live, and they would ask me, hey, I'm going to be done with my term, or with my service tour in like 6 months. Should I just leave now or should I wait the 6 months? Well, if you've got 6 months, and you're not doing a very serious tour of duty, wait the 6 months and get out then. But then they'll even ask, should I just, but I've only got 4 more years until I'm done with my 20 years and I can get all these great benefits and all this stuff. And it's like if you're a liberty-minded person, every second you're in the military is another second where there's the chance that, or where the moment's going to happen where your conscience is going to catch up with you. And you're not going to be able to follow the orders that are given to you. And
yeah, I mean, that could be a long time. I mean, you know, it sounds like, oh, it's only 6 months or it's only a couple of years. But when you're, as you said, I mean, when you're dealing with stuff like that, it's like, think of being in jail. Oh, it's only 6 months. Well, yeah, it's jail. So the same type of concept where the time goes slow, you know, when you're just waiting to get out.
Right. So, I mean, as soon as one can get out, get out. I mean, I understand where people want to, where it's easier to finish up a term, and I get all of that, and that's fine. But either way, you know, I never recommend people stay in any longer than they need to, because sooner or later, again, if you have that liberty mindset, sooner or later, your orders and your conscience are going to conflict. You know, there's going to be a problem.
Is that held against you in any way, being that I'm sure the military probably has a big file just because of that alone, you know, just the way that they're kind of, you know, labeling veterans and watching them and all this anyway, and then that probably is an even bigger red flag. But the way, you know how if someone's dishonorably discharged and someone does like a background check for a job or something, from what I understand, that would show. But does it show anything negative if someone was to look into your military record, or how does that work?
Sure. Well, first, I mean, when you leave the military, no matter which way you leave, it's something that sticks with you. If you go to buy a house, you have to show, you know, your paperwork. If you had to go to do this and that, I mean, you know, it never really leaves you legally. But as far as when you're getting out of the military, as I understand it, it's different for everybody. I got an honorable discharge, but I think you can get a dishonorable discharge for even the same reasons of conscientious objector, or there is just a general discharge, which I think is the most common. So it really depends more on, I think, you know, what your tour of duty was like. And I mean, you know, believe me when I say this, I'm not boasting, because I do not boast about my military career at all. I'm disgusted by it. But, you know, I mean, I was pretty well, you know, awarded and honored, you know, during that. So never went above an E4 or a specialist, but that was by choice. So, you know, whether or not
that's in 2 years though, too. I mean, if you would have stayed in longer, I'm sure you could have gone a lot further if you wanted to.
Well, that's kind of the thing about how to, you know, getting to the point of being an anarchist. I've never liked being in charge, so I never wanted to take sergeant. I just, which would have been the next level, would have been E5, and I just never ever wanted to do that. But yeah, I mean, definitely, you know, I think I moved up pretty fast, and that probably had to do with why I was able to, you know, walk away with an honorable discharge. But it does vary. But either way, any discharge, you know, is better than having that moment, having to deal with the moment where, you know, your conscience is going to conflict with your order.
Well, no, I'm not saying people should, you know, even worry about that. I was just curious of how, you know, because I know from what I've heard, you know, a dishonorable discharge could be held against you in certain circumstances. I don't know as much now with, you know, everything that, you know, people are more aware of these ridiculous wars, so maybe it's not as, you know, held against people as much as, say, maybe it would have been, you know, 50 years ago or something. I have no idea. But either way, yeah, I mean, if you want to get out, I mean, I personally, I don't know, the military was something that I would never even think of, not just because, you know, I mean, I wouldn't say I was always somebody who didn't think there should be a government, but I was probably always somebody who was at least a libertarian, even though I didn't really think about it in that perspective. But I just couldn't deal with the, you know, people telling me what to do like that, like the whole, you know, I've just seen movies, but because and this is what goes through my head too when you're saying, oh, they would tell somebody to wear, you know, somebody would have to wear like a pink, you know, vest or something. I would be like, fuck you, I'm not wearing this. And then I'm sure they, you know, do something, whatever, they beat you up or throw you in a cell or something. But to me, I'm thinking like, well, why wouldn't people just tell them to fuck off? But that's just my thinking, you know, my mind state. But I'm sure, you know, you can't. It's a lot easier to think that and think you could do that and do it than what's going to happen after that.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I've never seen movies show or anybody even really necessarily talk about. But one of the keys when you're going through basic training, at least with the Army, one of the keys is that even if you're doing everything right, even if you got the right haircut, you're in shape, you're doing, you're passing all the tests and everything. Even if you're doing everything right, they have to, the sergeants have to come up with something that you did wrong, and they'll make it up if they have to, and they'll just pretty much yell at you for no reason. So you get used to, they really do want to break you down. They don't want there to be an individual or someone, to think
well, that's
so
what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Sorry, that shows their perspective, that really what they're trying to do, that they would, find something. It really shows what they're about. And,
that's part of breaking you.
And I'm sure that a lot of these things or psychological type things that the military uses, that the government has, incorporated that into other ways of trying to control people and other, whether it's subliminally or subconsciously or whatever. Mm-hmm. And obviously from your experience in the military, you know more about this firsthand, but again, it seems like to me, and I don't know, and people could say, oh, it's a conspiracy theory, but there's enough stuff that has come out that the government has done, just, the mind control experiments the CIA did alone, to think about the fact that, they probably go pretty far with this trying to control people subconsciously, and all the time and work and effort and money they put into it, that it's probably so much further than you would even think, just thinking about it. I don't know how far it goes and what they, techniques and stuff like that. But like I said, even looking at what we do know that has come out, I'm sure that whatever we know, it's thousands of times worse or more than even what we know about that has come out.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. In fact, Ben Swan a couple of years ago broke a pretty interesting story, and speaking of controlling the narrative, and it was all about a government program, funded by DARPA, where they were literally trying to, control. They were talking serious mind control. This isn't even MK Ultra, and and this is pretty recent stuff. And they're really shooting for it using various technologies and brainwaves. Just all kinds of wild. I wish I could remember what exactly the title of the story was, but it was just insane to read that the government was interested in that much behavioral control. So they certainly are. It's not outlandish, as crazy as it sounds.
And what's even and I don't want to spend too much time on this. We'll get back to
sure.
Getting through how you got from there to getting into the ideas of liberty, but it's to me what bothers me. You have people like Alex Jones, who I do listen to, and I think I do get some stuff out of it, less than what I think I used to. But you have these people that they say how bad government is and all the stuff that they're doing and how inherently evil they are. And I agree with that, but then they still come to the conclusion, as I mentioned earlier, but if we just got the right people and we just went back to the Constitution, everything would be great. And that's kind of what he promotes. And that's right. Something that just really, obviously, you cannot give people power over you, because no matter what, look at what they're going to do. And for some people, I think that does help them to see, okay, well, look how bad the government is. And it really has to be in their face for them to get it. But if those same people go to or get to the same conclusion, I don't think it really does anything. If they actually conclude from that, well, look what government does. Why should we have a government? If government, right. We can't be worse off if we just rule ourselves.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So I know from there, as you said, you left the military, and I guess in the Army as well, you had read Murray Rothbard book that helped to, I guess, advance your ideas of liberty as well?
Yeah. Well, I got out of the military. I was supposed to be in for 4 years, and I got out, I should say, just under 2. One of the things was interesting that in one of our makeshift barracks there was a degree, of a library. They weren't ready to start shipping over the Xboxes and PlayStations at the time, so books are always available though. And ironically, there was it's a really small book by Murray Rothbard. It's called Anatomy of the State. And I mean, Murray Rothbard's, known really well for being an anarcho-capitalist. Not that that's a term necessarily I'd use, but in any case, but this book doesn't necessarily get into that so much, into the anarchist aspect, but it was really a deconstruction of democracy and how democracy is a fallacy, and how it doesn't work. And I read that, and it hit me pretty hard. Where I was like, boy, this whole game's rigged.
Yeah.
I mean, and I didn't become an anarchist, right away. It actually was many years after the fact, that I finally did. But that was pretty key. When you get, because like one of his initial arguments in that book, and again, very small book, but one of his initial arguments is that if 75% of a democratic population says that the other 25% has to die, is that voluntary suicide? And, instantaneously, anybody that gets asked that goes, well, no, that's terrible. But that's really that's the power of democracy. That's really
right. It's majority
democracy
rule.
Is. Yeah, exactly.
It's the majority can decide for the minority. And I talked a little about that last night. I actually had a former police officer who called in, and I think he called in a Free Talk Live before. Actually, I had sent Mark a message and asked to be recognized his name. But yeah, I mean, that was the whole thing there, where he's saying that he supports freedom, but okay, you support freedom, and you're talking about, he brought up the Constitution and democracy, but you're saying it's okay because drugs came up, because that's really, I think, my go-to thing is, because it's a simple concept to understand. You have the right to put what you want in your own body. So looking at that and saying, well, you think it's okay for the majority to decide what I can put in my own body, and just the whole concept of that somebody else, you think that it's okay for somebody else to decide what you put in your own body, and it's okay for government to use force to get you to do that. And it's just a crazy concept.
Yeah, absolutely. Drugs is a good one, because also it shows that a country is not made up of of its people. Because I think, I'm a kind of a teetotaler. I really don't drink, and I don't do drugs. I don't do any of that. I don't care if people do. But it's interesting. Most of the people I know, or not just in New Hampshire, but anywhere I've been, they smoke marijuana, and I think that if the U.S. was actually controlled by the people, marijuana would have been legal 10 years ago.
Well, they're being honest, I guess.
Yeah, right. So it's funny because drugs is a real good one to zing anybody that kind of supports the idea of the state, because it really shows the joke of it. So,
yeah, sorry. Go ahead. Well, one of the things that bothers me with the whole drug thing and people that are supporting marijuana being legalized, of course, as opposed to being decriminalized, not having the government have anything to do with it. But you have these people that say that, well, it's okay if marijuana is legal, but I don't want like heroin to be legal. And really, to me, those people are no different than somebody who wants marijuana to be legal. They're just drawing the line at a different point, because what they're saying is, well, I think marijuana is not that bad, so it should be legal. But the concept of, well, I still want to decide what's good and bad for people and tell people what they can put in their body is still the same. It's just their perception of, well, marijuana is just not that bad, so it should be legal. So there seems like there's a certain amount of those people, unfortunately, as opposed to the people that say, look, this is about the government telling you what you can put in your body and using violence to stop you, as opposed to, well, this just isn't that bad, so it should be legal.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Dave, and it's totally arbitrary. That's the thing that no one wants to admit, is that it's completely arbitrary where that line gets drawn on what's good and what's bad. Because it does come down to, really where the line should be, who does it harm, and who does it not harm, and whatever, and no one thinks of it in that regard. So, yeah, absolutely. But I mean, like, you know, the drug thing wasn't really, I think for a lot of people in the liberty movement, the drug issue is like, that's kind of what for lack of a better phrase, woke them up. You know, that's kind of their sword to die on, more or less.
Yeah, that was
and
one of the things that Ian had actually mentioned, Ian Freeman of Free Talk Live. I know you know who I'm talking about, but just for people
I love Ian.
that don't know, that I know he had mentioned that was one of the first things that made him start thinking about it. And you're right, there's a lot of people, you know, because a lot of kids try different things. I think the most people will at least try, you know, marijuana once. Wasn't a thing for me, but I tried it before. The last time I think I did it was like 20 years ago or something. But, but it wasn't my thing. But I mean, just that point that it's something that everybody can relate to and start thinking about, well, okay, so the government has the right to, you know, kidnap me and throw me in jail for possessing this. So yeah, I think that's definitely something that is a lot of people's first exposure or thoughts of. And actually, I just wanted to take a step back real quick, because one of the things I did want to ask you about was when you were younger, regarding, did you, as far as government and government control and rights and things like that, I know you had mentioned to me off air your parents were Democrats, but not too big in the politics. And your mother had worked for the government, and not a government agent or something, but in Social Security office. Like, yeah, she was an FBI, CIA agent. Yeah. But so when you were younger, was it ever something that you thought about or that came up, or did you, like, for me, you know, I mean, for as long as I remember, I thought drugs should be legal, and I don't know that was the influence of when I was younger, talking to my father about it, but I can't remember a time where I didn't think that. You know, and same with guns. But was it something for you that you didn't start thinking about till later, or what was your experience with those ideas when you were younger?
Yeah, it's not something that really, by and large, crossed my radar. I mean, I was, you know, I definitely would have, I fell into the camp of being a liberal, I guess, growing up. But, I mean, I was really, you know, by and large, I really didn't care. You know, before 9/11, I didn't really care what people did. You know, I mean, like, I saw, you know, honestly, even really young in my life, I had done a lot of traveling too, and, you know, seen a pretty good chunk of the world. And, you know, I saw all kinds of debauchery and nonsense that, you know, I mean, that would probably, you know, offend a lot of people, but I never saw people really getting hurt or whatever. You know, there's just, again, it comes back to that narrative of that people, you know, you're hearing that this stuff is all bad, and you're getting these choice cases on the news that are just, you know, really, really unfortunate. But at the same time, like, by and large, if you take into account, you know, that there's only, like, you know, one of these cases per week, or even per month or per year, where it's really, really crazy. If you step back for a minute, you're going to realize it's all not that bad. So I didn't see the world as really a bad place, as to where I think that was kind of the narrative getting pushed back then. So yeah, it wasn't. I really, you know, never had a whole lot of, you know, I just wanted to be left alone growing up, I guess.
Right. Well, which is a basic libertarian
I think
philosophy.
That's the ultimate. Right. If there's rights, the ultimate right is just to be left alone.
Right.
And amazingly, you know, I think that actually kind of stuck with me, that's something I had a pretty good chunk of my life.
So after you got out the Army and you had some of these ideas, how did you get to the point, go from, okay, I guess kind of entering into these ideas and starting to think about it, to where you're calling yourself an anarchist and joining the Free State Project and really, I guess, totally embracing those ideas?
Sure. So I guess I kind of have to backpedal just a touch to that. When I became a teenager, like I said, I was, you know, kind of living it up. I obviously, you know, denounced every religion I was ever a part of, and I became an atheist. But when I was in the military, after a little while, I became Christian again, and that didn't leave me. You know, when I left the Army, and so it took a while because, I mean, like, I know there's a lot of people that say, well, Christianity fits in fine with anarchism and voluntarism and all that. But I mean, in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, no, there's Jesus Christ and he's he's the ruler of the universe and all that stuff. So yeah, government's okay, and all that. It's like, yeah, it's necessary. I think of things like Romans 13 where it says governments are, appointed by God or leaders are in all of this business. And I know there's libertarian refutation to that. I'm aware of all of it. But in any case, that really, being religious, and I was really, like heavy duty religious, really stunted my, getting to, I could have been an anarchist. I could have really, really accepted the ideas of liberty, I think, a whole lot sooner, if I wasn't kind of held back by this notion, that there's a sky daddy that makes laws for you.
And to ask you a little to ask you a little more about that, because that's my perspective as well. And I don't know anything about the Bible, and I probably couldn't quote anything from it. But
you are spared, man. You are spared.
Right. Maybe I can read it as like a fiction book, just to read some stories. I've heard some stories from it.
I don't know.
like Adam and Eve sounds like a cool story with a snake and some sex and naked women. But it seems like to me every religion, from my perspective, and of course I believe people are free to believe whatever they want, does to me seem like it does not go with being supporting the ideas of what I call true freedom, because you're right. I mean, it is voluntary in the sense that, okay, you can choose to be part of religion, although most families will force it on their kids, so that choice most of the time does not apply if you're under 18, which is, I always thought that was a weird concept as well, to say that, the same way you are what your parents are ethnically, you are what they are religious from a religion standpoint. So to say that you inherit beliefs, I think is kind of a ridiculous concept in itself.
Absolutely.
To say, well, my parents believe this, so that means I believe this. No, okay, if your parents are from somewhere and you ethnically, if okay, that makes sense. But your beliefs, you inherit beliefs, I always thought was kind of ridiculous. But I know there are people that are libertarians and say, as you were saying, with every religion there are libertarian Christians, Muslims, but it does seem like another set of rules and rulers and people trying to tell you how to live your life. I guess the only difference, again, would be you choose to follow it, where it's not technically, if you don't follow it, you're not going to have the government come after you. Although religions will tell you that in the afterlife, I guess, you're going to have people come after you. So, in a sense, it's to me, it's a level just below government and what it is. And I mean, the government's used it to control people as well. I mean, if you look at even, or go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I'd almost challenge that and say it may actually be a level higher. Because you take a lot of, like, there's no laws against, there are some laws, but in most areas there's not any laws against, like, how short a woman's skirt is, okay? But due to, a lot of conservative religious beliefs, there's as much social enforcement as there is law enforcement towards perhaps how a woman can dress. And I'd almost venture to say that actual like social controls and social norms are even more dangerous than any law. Granted, they don't have the penalty of death, but then the question becomes, are there things worse than death? And I think people can really make one's life a living hell if you don't want to follow, the way that the community wants you to act and whatever. So I'd almost venture that religion could potentially be far worse.
I understand your point. The only reason why I say a level below is just because it's. I know what you're saying, but technically it's not forced on you, and say you could move from that community. So that would be really the only difference. From a brainwashing perspective, I think it's definitely religion is higher than government, even though I think government does its fair amount, as we were talking about. But yeah, from that standpoint, the only difference again is I would say that you do have the ability to leave it without having force or the police come after you. But besides that, no, I mean, in every other aspect, I would say that I agree. It's just that one thing that, okay, well, you can. Although, again, they're telling you, it's just you don't have to believe it, that worse things are going to happen to you when you die anyway than what the government's going to do to you.
Sure, and there's plenty of religions that don't believe in like a vicious afterlife or anything like that, and I understand that. But yeah, you raise a good point, because you could move somewhere where there isn't a religion, but you can't move anywhere where there isn't government.
Yeah, you can't escape government.
Yeah, that's a fair point, Dave. Absolutely. So anyway, as far as I think religion really held me back on my path to liberty, and it really. Again, I'm talking about those social controls and those social norms. I totally bought into the fact that, okay, I'm 20-something now. I need to be thinking about getting a family. I need to be thinking about children. I need to be thinking about a wife, the whole thing. And I bought
sorry, because I was going to say, I think along with religion, and religion definitely, depending on the religion, although I think all of them would tell you, to have a family and reproduce and that whole thing. But I think, society, and I would say that's, in a sense, it's a culture that's, I think, pushed by government as well. Not directly, but I think, and as we were talking about, all the subliminal stuff and propaganda, and subconsciously, I think that's what government wants people to do as well. They want you to be a good little taxpayer, have your family so you're tied down, have kids where you feel that, you have to obey certain things because, I got to think about the kids. I can't stand up to government. I can't stand up to this. So definitely religion, obviously, as well, but I think in general, I think that there's certain societal norms that I think are greatly influenced by government. I think, all of these things, it didn't just come out of nowhere. But a lot of that started from religion, and government, I think, kind of took it from there as well.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And, a great point I like to bring up, because people use this movie all the time. There's a movie called They Live from the 80s with
Roddy Piper.
Yeah, with Roddy Piper, right.
Wrestler.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a great movie, especially it's really popular with, liberty-minded people, because it's all about, there's these subliminal messages all over the place that say obey and, and all this stuff. And the one I never hear, because even like Alex Jones uses this, but again, Alex Jones is very conservative in his way of thinking. But there's one subliminal message in that movie that everybody forgets about, and it's the one that says marry and reproduce. And it's actually the largest one in the movie. Yeah, it's the largest one in the movie. So one of the ways, if They Live is a allegory to how government controls you and what they want you to do, one of the things is to marry and reproduce. That's one of the ways you get controlled. And so I think a lot of people skip that one, but it's pretty important to bring up. And I think it dovetails nicely with what you were saying.
Well, yeah, and of course, they get the tax revenue because they get more, or the extortion money, really. But the collateral on the debt, so they get that as well. But definitely, because even people, just talk to people, and the majority of people's perspectives that have kids and family will say that. I think in a way, I don't have kids, so whatever. I have pets, but you do it in a way. I think you do a disservice to not stand up, because that way you're kind of just pushing that down on your kids in that sense of saying, well, I can't stand up because I have a family and I have to make sure of whatever. If I stand up, this is going to happen. But in a sense, so you're just waiting for it to happen to them then. So you're just going to delay it and kind of push it on to them instead of saying, well, if I don't stand up for them, look at the life that they're going to have. Although just one person standing up, but I'm just saying from a I guess if you're just looking at it from a philosophical kind of standpoint, that really you're kind of just, saying that, well, they have to follow the same thing and obey, and their life is not going to be any better. And why is it, is it really worth it to say, to just keep the same thing going? Isn't it better for them for you to stand up? And you don't really hear anybody have that, say that, probably even if they think it, but to me, I think it's better that you stand up, because why live a life as a slave? And I'm talking in extremes, but just philosophically, if you're looking at it from that situation, it's really just going to get passed down to them, and then they got a, life as a slave or a serf or whatever.
Yeah, it's true. And because, I mean, kids are incredibly smart. They're really, really smart. And they pick up on so many things, so many body cues, social cues. They pick, because they haven't been deadened yet, but by schools or whatever else. Okay, that the adults have. They're really smart. And I think when they see their parents complying, they pick up on that. This is how I should do this. And that's a shame, because if a parent, does not comply, then it teaches the kid actually that noncompliance and individual sovereignty is how life should be. And that's a powerful message that parents could send to their kids, but instead, it's unfortunately, it seems like it's often the opposite.
Well, I think it's so many aspects, because even the way parents tell kids to do something, because I told you, or things like that, because I said so. Really, what you're telling them is you should blindly obey. That unless you're explaining to them, okay, well, you need to do this because of this or whatever, but regardless of what it may be, but to just say, well, just because I said so. It's really, you're communicating to your kids that, you just need to obey. It doesn't matter why. The reason's irrelevant. You just obey authority.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's such a shame, because, I mean, really, it's still another human being there, regardless of age, and they deserve the same respect, I think, just about any human deserves, And so to treat them like the government treats you, you really are just constantly, re-perpetuating the system. And
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, and just basically what you said, that it definitely keeps the system going. And you have so many people that are liberty-oriented people, or maybe even anarchist in the definition, the real definition, but don't treat kids that way. That they feel that way if you're 18 or something, but if you're under 18, then you're still like a slave, and that's a shame that people look at it that way, because even when you're looking at somebody, 16 and 17 is that much different than 18? You're just talking about the government came up with an arbitrary number. Oh, well, yeah, the government owns, you until you're – the government and your parents. I guess the government still owns you after you turn 18. But, just because the government has come up with some arbitrary number, people just base it off of that and look at it like, oh, well, you don't have – liberty doesn't exist unless you meet the government's arbitrary age, which kind of contradicts the whole concept of, freedom in a sense.
Yeah, no, it's true, and especially going back to the military for a second. I mean, this is kind of cliche to even say, but when you can join the military and you can go overseas and you can kill people, but at 17 years old, but you can't drink until 21. And I don't even drink, but it's like, wait a minute, you can kill people, but you can't handle drinking. It's like it just shows the arbitrariness of how children are treated. It really does.
Well, they have the same thing with, and I don't think it really means anything, because I don't think voting means anything anyway. I think the whole thing is rigged.
Right on,
but just
man.
The idea that, okay, well, same thing. You can go fight, but you can't vote. And what was it, in the 70s, I think they, during Vietnam or something, they lowered it to 18 where it was 21 to vote.
Exactly. Yeah, it shows all the arbitrariness of the whole system, and how people are treated, how teenagers, children are treated. It's crazy.
But so I know we kind of got off on some other stuff there.
Went on a tangent.
But which is fine. I got a lot of time to fill anyway. But some great. I wanted to get your ideas on that as well. So as you're saying that religion was kind of held you back, but you, I guess, moved on from that at some point, and that moved you more in the direction of liberty?
Yeah, eventually. I mean, it was kind of, a lot of that 2008 Ron Paul fervor, a lot of things like that started to, it's like, wait a minute, this isn't right. And the families, I mean, I ended up getting married and all this stuff, and that's all a very long story. But the bottom line is that I think almost everybody on the planet has this kind of innate feeling, whether they're statists or anarchists, whatever, doesn't matter. They have that feeling that something's wrong with the world. And my feeling that something was wrong was just growing and growing and growing, in large part due to, being in a really rough family situation, and a whole bunch of rough life situations at the time. And so, then New York State, the area that I lived in, I was actually in upstate New York at the time. The heavy hand of the government started to really attack people's pocketbooks when before it wasn't that way. In fact, where I was living in New York, they were changing the property taxes. They were doing a property tax increase of 56%. And
Jesus.
I couldn't.
Is that
yeah, and
sorry?
Is that the
whole? Was that the whole state, or was
no,
that
just this one area
where you were? Right. Okay.
Yeah, just this
New York
one
doesn't
area.
have a state property tax as well, do they? Because that sounds like something they would do on top of. I know property tax is based in that community, but who knows?
Yeah, no, and New York is notorious. There's been various, there used to be what was called the STAR program that was supposed to help people be able to pay these crazy property taxes because they're high anywhere you go, pretty much in New York. And so for it to end up going out,
sorry, I was just going to say that. I mean, that sounds ridiculous in itself. So the program's going to help you tax that goes to the same place, and it's whatever.
Yeah, it's circular logic. So where I was living was already one of the pretty higher end, places in New York where the property taxes were insane, and then for it to go up 56%, I wasn't going to have it, and so I started getting very involved in town meetings. I was actually running a store. I was a business owner in New York. And there was a problem of where they were wanting to do, they were like mandating background checks on people, like employees and whatever else, all this stuff that were relative to the business that I was in. And I was like, this is crazy. This is just going to hold everything up. The business has been going fine forever. Why is this needed now? It didn't make any sense. And so I would argue in that, and I got a blurb in the local paper, with me saying that this just it all feels like punishment, And so and unfortunately, my family, my immediate family and the family I was married into and whatever, they, none of them were supportive about the fact that I was really railing against and this was just local governments, what local governments were doing in New York, and eventually I ran into Free Talk. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. And it sounds like an issue that most people could agree on, because just to make a point about property tax, I mean, first of all, it's probably one of the highest levels of extortion, because at that level, they're going to just take your house away if you don't pay it. And at the same time, it's, okay, well, we can just put this at whatever number we feel like and tell you that if you don't pay it, we're going to take away the house that you may have even paid off at this point because you're not paying the extortion fees that we tell you to pay. And then if we come to the house and you say, well, you can't have my house, which makes sense to me, they're probably going to kill you if you try to defend yourself. I mean, the fact that people cannot look at that and see it for what it is ridiculous, that you're just going to buy something, not agree to, it'd be one thing, I mean, this is bad enough if you agree to, okay, I'm going to pay this number every year, and it's going to be the same forever, and you agree to pay for it, which is still, they're still forcing you because you wouldn't be able to buy it without agreeing to it. But at the same time, they're going to say, hey, well, we don't know what it's going to go up to. It could go up to whatever. You could have your house paid off, and you can't afford the property tax, and then they just take it away. So, sorry, I just wanted to
it's a great point,
that note on property tax.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, Dave, because it really it tells you, it's clear that you don't own anything. Because if you don't pay that tax, even if you paid off your house, which I had, you don't, it's telling you, guess what, we can still take it from you. So it's not really yours.
No,
at the end of the day. Yeah, you're always renting pretty much if you live in an area where there's a property tax. And
they can increase the rent anytime they want. It's not like it's not even like a fair rent, like if you're renting an apartment and you sign a lease for a certain amount of time and then you could say, well, I'm not going to agree, or you can negotiate if it's from a private owner. No, this is just, hey, well, we feel like increasing it 56%. If you don't like it, well, we're just going to take your fucking house away.
Yeah, but this is the thing, is that this is another area where the rules apply to the people in one way and it applies to the government in another. Because the U.S. Postal Service, they will do contracts where they will rent out from private people. It won't be even on, there's post offices that aren't even on government land. And they will sign like 40-year deals with with the renter, with the person that they're renting the post office land from. But they will pay the same price, and I know this because it was like this for the post office in the area that I was living, that I was actually just describing. And they can pay, if their rent was, if the rental fee they were paying was only like $1,000 or, to the renter, it'll be $1,000. If it was $1,000 in 1970, it'll still be $1,000 in 2010. And so
they're a government, agency.
Right, exactly. So
it's okay
the
for
rule,
them.
So the rules don't apply to them. But yeah, the rent can get raised on you anytime. It really is. It's pretty insidious. So I got to see a lot of this stuff, really firsthand, and really close to home on a very local level. A lot of people get confused and say, "Well, it's just the federal government that's bad." No, the government's bad on every level. The local government.
Right. Well, it's the whole concept to it, and I know a lot on Free Talk Live. I'll talk about secession, which I think is a positive thing because it's on a, you can have a bigger effect on a smaller level, but it's just, less rulers ruling you or ruling over less people. But it doesn't make it okay that, instead of having, the federal government rule over 300 million people, now you're having the state rule over 1 million people. But it doesn't change the concept of rulers. But I'm sorry, so you were getting into that. You were trying to speak out about some of this stuff, and your family was basically just didn't care and didn't support you, and they want to pay the extortion, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much. And so eventually I ran into Free Talk Live. This would be around, I guess, maybe 2010, 2011, around there. And Free Talk Live was on 7 nights a week. I mean, it was, 3 hours a night. I mean, nonstop action, to have that content out there. And that, in a very real sense, there was so much content, and I could spend so much time listening to it at my job at the time. I was working at a technology company in upstate New York, and throughout the day I could listen to it, and they have tons of content to listen to, and they really, in a very, they kind of became my replacement family that actually supported what I was doing. Even though I didn't really call into them much or whatever, just the fact to hear somebody else saying that this is okay, what you're doing, and that you're in the right. Was so comforting. And, and then what's that?
Sorry, no, I was going to say you saw other people, when you were in New York, it's like, okay, well, everybody thinks I'm weird or different or nuts or whatever. And you're like, hey, there are other people that actually have these ideas. It's not just me. And it makes you
and they were getting and they still do. But it was amazing, to have that venue. To really hear things, and that's why I think it's important. And I'll say this now. I mean, I'm glad you're doing this podcast or this radio show, Dave, because there can't be enough of these because somebody needs this. And like I really needed Free Talk Live, and there was other shows. Pork Therapy was the podcast that was highly influential. It really, like Free Talk Live, if a lot of people say Free Talk Live is the elementary school of liberty, well, Pork Therapy, which was a show run by Stephanie Murphy, who's now my girlfriend, of course.
Yeah, I was going to say who later became your girlfriend.
But that, Pork Therapy was like that. That was university. You know what I mean? That was taking it all the way. And listening to that, you constantly start hearing about the Free State Project, and so what you're hearing is hey, I know where you're, and it's so true because you hear these people say this all the time, but it sounds cliche, but it's not. It's like, I know where you are. You're alone in what you're doing, but guess what? There's actually a place where there's a whole ton of people doing something, and who think in very like manners as you do. And so, after a while, I just finally said, that's enough. And just like when I was in the military and I said, that's enough, I said, I'm moving to New Hampshire, and I had a short drive. Amazingly, I only had to drive 3 hours to get
from New York is not that far.
Yeah, it's a short
so that was
a
good thing.
Yeah, I know for some people it's kind of a long one, but for me, I drove 3 hours. I actually drove through a terrible snowstorm. In fact, I was an atheist again at this moment, as I am now. But I really, for a minute there, this snowstorm was so uncanny. It was October 28th, 2011. I'll never forget it. I almost thought it was is God trying to give me a hard time here or something? here I'm going to be happy or whatever, but obviously that's nonsense. But yeah, made it and got there. And when you get into a community like the Free State Project has, of anarchists, voluntarists, whatever they want to call themselves, you get, and there's not really any judgment, you get to grow so fast in your way of thinking. Like, I mean, it takes no time. I mean, I was pretty well, set in my anarchist ways by that time, after listening to Free Talk Live for a while and whatever. But it's pretty amazing how quickly, there's a saying when you move to the Free State Project that, the different, if you're what they call a minarchist, where you still believe that some government's okay. And the difference between a minarchist and an anarchist in the Free State Project is 6 months living there.
Yeah, I've heard that. I think it was, it might have been Ellen Ball who had said that, because when I talked to her, I think when she first moved, she was still kind of a minarchist at that point, and it didn't take too long for her to get move on from that. But I think to me, really, it seems to be just about, whether you're in New Hampshire or elsewhere, and of course, it seems, in New Hampshire, where you're surrounded by all these other people with similar ideas who aren't holding you back, like where you're saying, it's easier basically to grow there, because as opposed to being someplace else where you have all these people trying to tell you that you're wrong and your ideas are wrong and things like that, where you don't have that there. But to me, I think it's also continuing to think and question, and instead of, I think some people just stop there. Okay, well, now I want limited government, and they just kind of stop there, and they don't continue the thinking that got them there in the first place, continue to question and think about things. But I know we've had you on like an hour already, so I want to take a quick break and give you a chance to, whatever, go to the bathroom and get a drink or something.
Absolutely.
And we will be right back after this. We will talk more with Brian Sovryn of Sovryn Tech. We'll get some more into Brian's story, how he got on the radio. Also, we'll get into technology, the surveillance state, and get Brian's thoughts on that as well. So stay tuned. I was trying to think what I was going to say. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Non-Partisan Liberty for All Radio.
May the 20th, 2010 started out like any other day. Two veterans of our West Memphis, Arkansas Police Department, Bill Evans and Brandon Powdert, were patrolling the interstate as part of the department's drug interdiction team, something they love to do. They became involved in what seemed to be a routine traffic stop, though I've always warned my officers there is no such thing. But really, how much more routine can you get than pulling over a father and son in what looked like a church bus? My men didn't realize who or what they were dealing with. Neither officer made it home. And one of them was my son. I'm Bob Powdert, Chief of the West Memphis Police Department. My officers, Bill and my son Brandon, didn't realize that there are people at war with this country that are not international terrorists. They are seemingly ordinary people, just like you and me, but they don't recognize the federal government's authority to impose laws or taxes on them. They're known as sovereign citizens. Their beliefs may sound so out there that they appear comical or crazy, but don't discount or ignore these people, because they're willing to kill and be killed for these beliefs. We as law enforcement officers need to recognize this very real threat so we can protect ourselves. And maybe if Brandon and Bill had been able to recognize the warning signs of sovereign beliefs, they'd be alive today.
In 1995, 168 men, women, and children were killed in the worst domestic terrorist attack on American soil in our nation's history. Aimed at the federal government and law enforcement, the bombing in Oklahoma City was the horrific symbol of the wave of anti-government sentiment that swept across the country in the 1990s. I'm retired ATF Special Agent in Charge James Cavanaugh. I spent more than 30 years at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and I was there at the beginning of the so-called Patriot movement. I watched in 1992 as the standoff between law enforcement and a white separatist, Randy Weaver, in Ruby Ridge, Idaho, ended with the deaths of a federal marshal and Weaver's wife and son. I was there in the shootout the next year when David Koresh and more than 70 of his followers, along with 4 ATF agents, died in a fiery siege near Waco, Texas. What we didn't understand at first was that these events were a catalyst for the growth of a radical anti-government movement, a catalyst for the birth of armed militias. At its height, there were more than 800 of these anti-government groups throughout the country. Some were part of what is called the sovereign citizen movement. They believe the government has no right to tax or impose laws on them. Following law enforcement crackdowns after Oklahoma City, many anti-government groups disappeared. But the threat from hardcore elements of the radical right continued to simmer. In fact, between the Oklahoma City bombing and the recent West Memphis shootings, approximately 30 law enforcement officers lost their lives to homegrown extremists. 2 officers were killed in Abbeville, South Carolina in 2003, for example, by extremists who did not believe the government had any right to use a tiny portion of their land to widen the public road. Today, the threat of radical right violence against police officers has escalated because the radical anti-government movement has swelled once again. Jerry and Joe Kane, the father and son who were involved in the murders of the 2 officers in West Memphis, traveled around the country giving seminars on how to supposedly circumvent the legal system.
So what we're after here is not fighting, it's conquering.
Right.
I don't want to have to kill anybody. But if they keep messing with me, that's what it's going to have to come out. That's what it's going to come down to, is I'm going to have to kill, and if I have to kill one, then I'm not going to be able to stop. I just know it. I mean, I have an addictive...
Along with physical confrontations, sovereigns also practice a form of harassment and intimidation, often referred to as paper terrorism. They file bogus claims or liens against officers, prosecutors, or judges that can be difficult to get removed from court records. In 2010 alone, sovereign citizens have filed liens, cease and desist orders, and documents called letters of marque, or truth affidavits, against officers and agencies across the country. The following are some indicators that you as an officer need to be aware of to protect yourself. They are signs that the person you've encountered considers himself to be a sovereign citizen who is immune from the law. The first thing that any officer notices at a traffic stop is the vehicle's license plate. If you try to call in many sovereign plates, you'll find no record of them, and for good reason. They're either homemade or professionally produced fakes. They may display the names of strange nations, embassies, or tribes. They may refer to the Uniform Commercial Code or the Constitution. Bumper stickers are another easily visible sign of sovereign beliefs. One that reads Posse Comitatus, which is Latin for power or force of the county, means the driver believes county officials, such as sheriffs, are the highest level of law enforcement, and that the federal government and its officers don't have any legal authority. Stickers such as I am an American national or not subject to corporate federal or corporate state jurisdiction are signs that the vehicle's occupants are part of the radical anti-government movement. When asked for their driver's license, vehicle registration, or other identification, sovereigns may show documents that at first might look legitimate, but after a closer inspection are obviously fake. The fake driver's license could have the words, without prejudice, UCC 1-207, a reference to the Uniform Commercial Code. What might look like a real Social Security card to you may actually read, Social Security, Socialism in America, still 100% voluntary, for global domination and slavery, not for identification. Sovereigns often will have unusual responses to routine questions about their identification or license plate. If the officer asks the person's name, a sovereign may respond, I am a free man, traveling upon the land, or what authority do you have to question a sovereign? If asked for a driver's license, the person might say, is one required of a sovereign? Or they might ask you for your delegation of authority. If you continue questioning them, they might say, "Officer, I do not believe I, nor this private vehicle, falls under your jurisdiction, and here is the proof." Then they might show you what appear to be legal documents. Jerry Kane handed West Memphis officers Brandon Powder and Bill Evans some odd-looking papers. Powder and Evans didn't recognize the documents or understand what they meant. Many sovereigns sign legal documents in red ink or with a thumbprint in red ink. The subject's name might be in all capital letters or have strange punctuations such as the first name, then a hyphen, then the middle name, followed by a colon and the last name. Sovereigns believe this type of capitalization and punctuation shows they are immune from government authority. Some sovereigns may record their encounters with police, possibly in an effort to intimidate the officers. They might warn the officer that they are recording the encounter and then say something like, "I am reserving all of my common law rights." Some of these recordings showing the officers are then posted on the sovereign's websites. Now you have some knowledge on how sovereigns operate.
And during the few moments that we have left, we want to talk right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand.
Non-Partisan Liberty for all, and we are back. If you've missed any of the show, you can catch this show and any others. You can catch the archives at blogtalkradio.com/nonpartisan liberty for all or on iTunes. And be sure to tune in tomorrow, which I think is a really important show, not anything to do with me, but we're having Dale Brown of the Detroit Threat Management Center. You can check out the YouTube videos that Peter Koplock had put together. Just type in Detroit Threat Management Center on YouTube. But it's, to me, what I would look at as an alternative to government police that focuses on safety, protection, and de-escalation of violence, using violence as a last alternative, and definitely doing everything they can to avoid lethal violence and putting everybody else's safety first, among other things. So I had talked to Dale last week as a, prior to a pre-interview, I guess, or just to talk about, doing the interview. He seems like a great guy, and he has a lot to say, not only about the Detroit Threat Management Center and his story, but also he has a lot of experience working with police as well. So hopefully he'll share some of those stories. I don't know which ones he might not want to mention on the air, but he has a lot of information. He definitely seems like a really good guy and entertaining as well. So be sure to tune in tomorrow. But tonight we have a great guest as well, Brian Sovryn, former co-host of Free Talk, the Sunday show of Free Talk Live, as well as co-host of Sovereign Tech. So before we went to break, we were talking about Brian's journey to liberty, and we kind of left off at moving to New Hampshire and joining the Free State Project. And I know, Brian, one of the things you were saying is how the atmosphere is there, and all of the people that I've talked to from New Hampshire, I think I've had more people on from New Hampshire than Las Vegas. Probably a lot more, actually, at this point, which is fine. Yeah. It's kind of sad. I guess nobody in Vegas wants to come on my show, but no. But, I get a lot of the same things from them, that, it's a supportive community, and it's a lot easier to be there's a lot more positivity there, just because, as you were saying, and New York is probably an extreme, just like, Massachusetts and probably parts of California. But yeah, no matter where you're at, if you're not around people that are supporting you, and as you were saying, it was like, okay, does anybody else have these ideas? And no matter what, no matter how confident you are, you're still going to question it, a lot of those things more. because you don't have people that support you. So as you said, I mean, luckily there were shows like Free Talk Live, or not were, there still is, but I mean for you at the time, that helped with that. So it's funny how you went from a listener of Free Talk Live to actually being on the show and being a co-host on Sunday. So how did you end up, from moving to New Hampshire, end up becoming a co-host on Free Talk Live?
Yeah, I was kind of living the dream there. I mean,
yeah,
it was. Yeah, really, what happened was I had. I had mentioned the other show, Pork Therapy. That's PORC Therapy. That's not on the air anymore. It might come back, but anyway, I had emailed Stephanie Murphy on that, and she was on Free Talk Live. And I had moved to Keene, and she's like, "Hey, you want to stop by and see a show happen, on Sunday nights on Free Talk Live? Come on by." And I think just about everybody that moves to New Hampshire has to at least go see the Free Talk Live studios, or at least, sit through a show themselves. It's almost, I dare call it a rite of passage. But anyway, I went and did that. And I would hang out around the Keene Activist Center at that time. And Stephanie would, she kept inviting me. Yeah, oh, you're here, cool. Why don't you come over and enjoy the show? And eventually it got to a point after a few months where Mark Edge, the other Sunday host at the time, he was going away on some trip or whatever, and Stephanie needed a co-host. And she and I had become pretty good friends at the time, and she's like, "Well, I'll have Brian on." And ironically, Mark Edge said, he's like, "Well, if I knew he wanted to be on the radio, I would have put him on months ago." But anyway, because I would just sit kind of quietly and just enjoy the show, and we would talk about whatever the callers were saying in between segments and everything. And so I ended up getting on the air that first time, and then Mark was pleased with it, and Stephanie loved it, and so I ended up, that turned into a 2-year stint on Free Talk Live after that. So that was. That's really how I ended up on there. But it was pretty amazing to be, a big fan of the show, and then to end up co-hosting it. And I got to do what they call first chair, where you actually run the calls and all that stuff. I got to do that quite a few times, and that was a lot of fun.
And then I know at that same time you were also thinking about starting a podcast as well that dealt more with technology from a liberty perspective, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, my whole life, I've always been into computers. It started off, just a little, I mean, literally, I really cannot, I don't have a memory where there wasn't a computer in the house. So, it was a machine that allowed me to play games, it allowed me to write, it allowed me to do all kinds of things. And so I just got self-taught, in the computer realm at the time, but I got pretty involved in the cypherpunk community as a teenager and growing up even more. And some of those skills, quote unquote, helped when I got into the military, but also I went through a degree of more professional technology training when I was in the military. And then but then when I got out of the military, I ended up working for another technology company, and so it's always been my interest, it's always been my passion. And there's a lot of tech podcasts out there, but I didn't hear one that was talking about that was looking at these things from a liberty perspective. And so I felt the need, to have my opinion heard, which I think is a great reason to do a podcast. It's important when someone wants to do a radio show or a podcast. It's like, why am I doing this? Do I just want to be a celebrity? What's the deal? And I'm not saying any of that's invalid, but really my whole thing didn't care about any kind of celebritydom or whatever. I just wanted my opinions out there because they weren't being heard. And so I created Sovryn Tech. And it's taken off pretty well. I've been doing it for about 2 years now, those opinions still aren't out there, even after the Snowden revelations, that happened, over a year ago. People still aren't getting that message out there that, hey, maybe this whole government thing's a bad idea. It doesn't exist. So I'm happy to be out there, with my own show that is kind of, leading that charge more or less.
And yeah, I mean, well, I wanted to mention the Snowden revelations as well, but as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I think more shows like that, not technology specifically, but shows where you're taking just a general subject, whether it's a radio show or YouTube or other media, and looking at it or presenting it from a liberty point of view, because most of the shows are kind of like mine, like talking about, all the stuff the government's doing, and government is bad, and they're a mafia and all this stuff, which is good. I mean, we need those shows as well.
Sure.
But at the same time, there's so many other ways to promote the ideas of freedom and liberty and actually talk about, all these different things that are interesting as well. So even from that, somebody might listen to your show that might not necessarily be a libertarian or anarchist, but they might actually, they're listening because of the tech aspect, and then they may actually find those ideas of liberty from listening to your show. So it definitely, I think, helps to get the ideas out there into different areas and through different ways.
Yeah, I think this is something that's really missing. I think there should be a medical, liberty show. There should be, an art liberty, a liberty radio show, podcast, whatever, that's about art. There should be, all these niche areas, I think, need to be filled in with somebody that says what the state is doing to affect and harm that field. There's not enough. I look forward to the day when they do start to crop up. But that doesn't mean that, certainly the more general shows or like the current event type shows are incredibly important. Because you do, I've had lots of people contact me that, that essentially say that I turn them into an anarchist. I'm not going to say, people turn themselves into things. I'm not going to.
You radicalize them.
Yeah.
as other people would say.
Yeah. So, and even, in another area, I did a show called Sex and Science Hour with Stephanie Murphy, who I mentioned before. And this was on the Let's Talk Bitcoin network, which is kind of the premier Bitcoin show and network. And we got tons of emails from people, all because we were addressing the Bitcoin space and pretty much Bitcoin only. Even though it was called Sex and Science Hour, we just kind of mixed it up. We didn't want to just talk all Bitcoin. But because there was, liberty-minded people at the helm, we got lots of emails of people saying, well, you know what? I'm converted. I'm an anarchist now.
And the word sex in it, I guess, probably helped. And knowing some of the stuff that you guys mentioned on Free Talk Live about your relationship, I'm sure there was some of that talk going on as well that attracted people there, and some interesting stuff that I'm sure is going on.
Yeah. Stephanie and I have a lot of fun. So
yeah, so I've heard, I guess, from the show, but with, of course, Free Talk Live, it's on regular radio, sort of. There are things you can't bring up, so I'm sure on a show like that, there's no limits there, or nothing to stop you from talking about whatever you want. So I'm
absolutely.
sure
and people
very
can still check it out. It's out there. So yeah.
Where do you know where people can find the archives, or they just search the show? Or?
Yeah, you can go to SoundCloud and type in Sex and Science Hour, or even if you just go in Google, there's a sexandsciencehour.com, but there's not a whole lot going on there. But it's a show. It goes to the SoundCloud page. It goes. If you type in sexandsciencehour.com, it'll take you to the SoundCloud page. So it's a fun show. Yeah.
I'll have to definitely check a couple episodes of that out.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you guys may be bringing it back because you've got a lot of positive feedback.
Yeah, we might be bringing it back. I mean, it was an insanely, each episode was getting, 20,000 some odd downloads. I mean, it was really a very popular show. So it's just our schedules were just so crazy that we couldn't really keep it up. So. But, who knows, maybe in the future. But, I have Stephanie on Sovereign Tech a lot, and so sometimes that ends up being not unlike what Sex and Science Hour was. So, but it's good to have these niche shows out there. They're really important.
No, definitely, and that's what, I was thinking about earlier as well, that there should be, as you were mentioning, all these other areas that could have liberty-oriented shows as well. And again, there doesn't seem to, I don't know of any besides yours. That doesn't mean that there isn't. I'm sure many people don't know my show exists neither. So, that happens as well. But yeah, definitely, it doesn't just have to be about talking about the government and current events and things like that. Right. If you have something else there that you're passionate about or that you have expertise in, that is something that you can, kind of bridge that gap there and bring people into the ideas of liberty through something else, again, for people that may, just be focusing on whatever that subject is, but then they hear some of these ideas of liberty, and then, maybe they even start to listen to other liberty-oriented shows as well, and it's definitely a positive thing, and hopefully more people will kind of take your lead on that and create shows like that, especially now where, obviously anybody can have a show. I have a show. So all you got to do is, you can go to these different sites and there's obviously positives and negatives about Blog Talk Radio. One of the complaints, I guess, that I've heard is just the sound quality and there, compared to as bad as mine is, I don't think it's that bad, but it's not, I played a clip from Free Talk Live earlier and people could probably tell the difference that the sound quality compared to mine. It is better than some of the other shows, but that kind of just means that the other shows are terrible. But I'm trying to constantly improve that. But it has some of the things that you'd have to, invest maybe not a lot of time, but enough time and use different types of software to do it, like where it has, the call-in feature, the screening calls, it creates the podcast for you, so it's all these things in one software. And I was trying to look at other things that are out there, and a lot of them are, separate, where, okay, you have this where you can take, if you use this, you can take calls, and this you can stream live, and so it's good from that side of it, and we'll see if I ever get a more, I guess, listens, then maybe I'll look into that. But right now, of course, with having my full-time job as well and trying to put as much time into this, I don't want to really spend more time trying to do all these other things.
It's true. Most most radio show guys, most podcasters, a lot of them have day jobs. So I have a day job.
And, so something like Blog Talk Radio just makes it a lot easier to take care of all that other stuff that you'd probably have to spend more time on. But absolutely. I went off on a whole thing on that. My point being is that anybody can have a show now. It's great that the technology's out there and we have the internet where you can get your ideas. Basically, I could reach anybody, in the world, in theory. Not that I am, but it's possible. So it's the constraints are only, they're on you. However, you don't have any constraints on what you can do. So it's all up to you as far as you want to take it. One of the things you had mentioned though was the Snowden revelations, and I think a lot of us pretty much, and especially with your military experience as well, I'm sure. All these things that were going on that pretty much thought that was going on anyway, or at least to some extent. I think it's even worse than whatever comes out. It seems to always be a lot worse, and then you find out 10 years later, the government was doing this, because they'll wait like a certain amount of time, a lot, and something will get declassified, and then no one pays attention to it anyway. But they don't do that anymore. I brought up earlier the MK Ultra and the CIA, and it came out, I believe, in the 70s, and it happened, I think, like in the 50s or something. And it's, we don't do that anymore, though, because, okay, sure. So, but one of the things that you had mentioned is, that people still, not only do they not seem to be questioning government enough or why even government exists, but they don't seem to really care, period. It's really disturbing, and it's like, think about, and I'm trying to think of some kind of analogy here, but if the government was just breaking down doors every day in your neighborhood and taking things or whatever, or taking pictures, or maybe that's not the best analogy, but this whole idea like that this is somehow not a big deal to some people. This is a huge thing that the government's doing. This is any oppressive government that you could ever think of, probably in the history of the world. Of course, they didn't have the same technology, but
sure.
Why do you think, one, that is, in your opinion, and what other things can you do, not you being you personally, but people in general, to get people to realize the extent of some of the stuff, and not just with that, but technology in general, and the things that the government, the ways that the government is using it?
Right. Yeah, they're great questions. And I think your analogy is pretty apt, and it will actually lead to kind of step one. And that is that, really what the NSA, CIA, FBI, alphabet soup organization, they, them, those, whatever, what they are doing is tantamount to them kicking down your door. When they turn on your webcam without your knowledge, they are essentially spying into your house. They are kicking down your door and looking in your house. And so, what can one do? I'll tell you, the first thing that one can do to get awareness about this is on your laptop, put a piece of tape over that camera on your laptop and cover that baby up. Yeah. I'm glad. It seems like that's starting to become very, very normal. In fact, the Electronic Frontier Foundation at EFF.org, great organization to support as far as electronic freedom goes. They actually sell stickers that are like easily removables that you can put over, the camera and all that stuff. And I think even that action alone is really, that says to people, hey, why is that? And it's a conversation starter, and it's an actual actionable, easy solution that people can do to really thwart a lot of what these alphabet soup organizations are doing. But as far as, why don't they care? It's a great question. And, I'm not one to believe historically that people have really changed that much. I think we're just more aware of problems, more so than that somehow they're new to the day. And it's interesting, though, the one area where I might caveat this is that I remember when I was growing up, I spent a lot of time in Radio Shack. Again, I'm into technology. When I was a little kid. And I can remember vividly when Radio Shack, this was unique in the 80s and 90s, Radio Shack was asking for your phone number, and Radio Shack was asking for your home address and all this stuff. And I remember adults freaking out when stores started doing this, and they say, well, what do you need that for? They would refuse to give it. Sears started doing it after Radio Shack did, and others. And so there really does seem to be, there was a time where, at least in the United States that I can speak for, where people did care far more about their privacy than they do now. What changed that? I'm not really sure. I don't know when that changed. As far as is the NSA, is what they're doing new? Of course not. The Snowden revelations just delivered the proof. It's not like it wasn't happening. There's cases of room. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Well, I was going to say, even, go back to just even history, go back 50, 60 years ago. Some of the, even more, to whenever they could do it, they did it. The difference, obviously, is the technology now where everybody has a computer, everybody's on the internet, so it makes it easier. But the concepts, I think, are still exactly the same. And look at the FBI with J. Edgar Hoover and all the stuff that he did and all the information he had. And that's just, somewhat of what we know about, which, most of the stuff we still don't even know about. So, yeah, I don't think anything has changed, neither just the way they're doing it, the method, I guess, of how they're doing it or what they're doing it with, but the concept of just getting data on people and spying on people, I don't think anything's really changed there.
Yeah, no, there's cases, there's Room 641A, which is a really, really famous case where the government was working with AT&T and they were setting up apartments all over the country that were just they were renting these apartments. Nobody was living in them. They were just loaded with surveillance equipment that was designed to listen to, cell phone conversations and whatever else, and collect all this different metadata. And it was started in 2002. People didn't find out about it until 2007. You had 1994. The NSA made what's called the Clipper chip, which was this. It's a piece of hardware. It's a chip that would get put into whatever device, and it would allow for the NSA to have a back door to access to that device. Now, consumer, again, this goes back to, like I said, it seems like at some point people really did care about their privacy because the Clipper chip got shut down. Like that just wasn't going to happen. The American people and even companies were like, no way, we're not doing this. And again, though, yeah, so it's not anything new. But this leads to, though, I think, a very hard pill to swallow. And that is that the Internet, in and of itself, is really, it's never been created with the idea of privacy in mind or of anonymity in mind. And those are two separate things. But it really has been. I mean, it's such an amazing tool. It's allowed so many people to, come to the ideas of liberty. It's allowed for such incredible, it's allowed for education. It's allowed for Bitcoin to exist. It's allowed for so many different things. But at the end of the day, it's a really nasty bit of technology, and I hate to say it. But at the same time, I mean, it's been fostered to be part of this, what you said, the surveillance society, or not the surveillance society, but the surveillance state. It's fostered that. And maybe because it was, and this is maybe the only answer I could come up with, maybe because the Internet was just, the benefits seemed so overwhelming that it kind of conditioned people to accept not just a surveillance state, but a surveillance society that has nothing to do with government, where people think that all of this is normal and okay.
Oh, no, definitely. Well, the other thing, too, is it seems to have carried over to everything else as well, that whether it's because of the acceptance of not having privacy on the Internet or not, that it's not just been accepted, well, people are going to know what I'm doing on the Internet. It applies now to, of course, cameras everywhere and, cell phones being listened to. So it's not just the Internet where people are accepting the invasion of privacy. It's carrying over to everything else now as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, too, because there still seems to be like a little bit of semblance of people being interested in privacy, because at least in the United States, because when they hear about, like in London, how there's cameras everywhere, they're appalled at that notion that there's cameras on every street block and whatever. But it's ironic because then you get into more recent cases, which I'm sure you've talked about a ton on this show, that being, like the Eric Garner case in Ferguson, and now how the federal government in the U.S. is wanting to put, cameras on police. But it's funny because the same people that would be disgusted at the notion of cameras being all over London are so willing to have cameras all over the place in the United States now. So there does seem to be almost this either people don't realize the contradiction in their own mind, or there's this constant breaking down of their desire for privacy, and maybe that just comes out of fear. I really, I don't think there's a clear-cut answer.
Yeah, and that's been an interesting debate as well with having cameras on police, because there's the aspect of, okay, well, it's watching the police, but my issue, of course, with that is the fact that, look, who's going to be controlling all the information and the data, and who can, get those files, and it's the police. And then, of course, you have various cases. I mean, the Eric Garner case is one of them, but there are ones, one of the victims are murderees, or whatever you want to call it. I don't think that's a word. But I had a sister of Ernesto Duenas who was murdered on video. Didn't have any weapons. Cop pretty much just pulled up, 10 seconds later, shot him 13 times. I think hit him, got hit with 11 bullets. And everybody can see that video. It was on dash cam, and the cop got suspended for 3 days. So it's, you try to think about. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, he didn't even get suspended until the investigation was done. He was only suspended with pay for 3 days. It's insane. And he had actually come around and said, "Oh, nothing's going to happen," because they're still protesting, and this happened in 2011, meeting his family and people in the area, so the Sacramento area. But you think about, well, if government is sponsoring this and wanting this to happen, they usually have some other motivation in how it's going to benefit them. And again, it's not, and I actually just thought of this, but the fact that it's not even pointed on the officer neither. It's the officer, on the officer viewing everybody else. Right. There's a side of me that says, well, this is somewhat positive because, okay, all interactions, but the fact that the control of it, again, is going to be totally controlled by the government, I really don't think it's going to do much to benefit anybody. Maybe some of the cops may be a little less apt to do something, maybe. Right. But I would still suggest to everybody, not to rely on that. I think one of the things, though, is it's gonna they're gonna be able to present it to people like, oh, look, there's no issues now because the cops have cameras on them. Like, that solves everything. Right. As well, but yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to get off on a whole big thing there. It's an important thing to talk about because I think people, and I understand the argument, that police will have an objective record, attached to them at all times, but people forget that an objective record is still open to interpretation. And I mean the way the camera, captures certain events may not be how it really went down. People, there's very famous cases that have nothing to do with anything important that highlight this. There's my favorite case to bring up. I used to be a football fan. I'm not anymore. But there's the Immaculate Reception, from 1972, where it's this very famous catch that gets made where it bounces off an offensive player, but the catch might have been illegal. And it's been argued for, almost 40 years, this whole thing. And the more data they get, they find out that they've been wrong the whole time, but then they get another piece of data, and then they find out, no, the play was good and all this stuff. So even though you have all this objective information, you have tons and tons of cameras, it still doesn't matter because it's all up to interpretation at the end of the day. And if the government's the one that finally ends up being the interpreter, then who cares? What does it even matter to have? That's the problem there, that they're the ones who are not only interpreting that data, but controlling it as well. And then you can bring something like editing in there. And, of course, anybody who's seen a dumb reality show, what is that? That's all editing to create a narrative. Exactly. That's really what it is. You just put a camera in front of somebody for 24 hours a day, and then you can edit it to create some interesting story that you can fit into an hour or something. So it's the same type of thing. So, I think in general, it's not going to do much. And if, again, you have to question anything that the government's supporting like they are, you have to question their motives there. Sure, absolutely. But that's a good point regarding, as you said, where you have and it's not, a lot of the cities in the United States, I was going to say you have, as you mentioned, England, but you have a lot of cities in the United States that are pretty much, parts of New York City, Boston. Even in Las Vegas, every stop, and I don't know if you've ever been to Las Vegas, but it's all, everything's crisscross or everything's straight. So you have an intersection, every block is an intersection with a camera there. And I first noticed those in 2001, so they've been around for a long time too. And I remember even saying something about it at the time I was getting my master's, and I was taking like a business law, some type of business law class or whatever. But I asked, the professor, or maybe it wasn't a professor, whatever he was, the lawyer who was teaching the class, that isn't that invasion of privacy? And, of course, their legal definition is the expectation of privacy. You don't have an expectation of privacy to be out in public. But when you have the government, surveilling people by putting cameras out there, to me, that's violating people's rights. It's the government. Yeah, that's an interesting point, too, because one thing, like I said, there seems to be contradictions at times in the way people react to things, because red light cameras are almost universally panned and hated, and they get taken down within a year or two of when they get put up in most towns in the United States that we know.
Not everywhere, but in most areas that's how it works. But then it's interesting. Once you change the narrative of how these cameras are going to work, as in now they're saying, well, it's not necessarily to to give you a ticket, but now it's to protect you. It's to hold the police accountable. But either way, it's still the same. It's still the state getting the same technology out there that they've wanted. It's still the same amount of surveillance that they wanted with the red light cameras. Just now, it's going to be attached to the police. And so, I think people miss that. So they kind of have it right. But again, that narrative is so important. We were talking about that earlier, where I think narrative is 90% of the situation, of how the situation gets reacted to. And that's really what's changing with this, I think.
Right, where it's the government, of course, is going to present it as, well, this is a good thing, this is filming the police, although that doesn't mean behind it they're thinking about, well, okay, we can use this in other ways to surveil people and, whatever other ideas they have for this. Again, I think it's a lot of it, though, is to just try to satisfy people that, oh, look what we did and everything's great now.
Sure.
But I'm sure there are other ideas there as well with just increasing the surveillance state also.
Absolutely.
So with going back, I guess, to the whole what came out with Snowden, and again, prior to that, maybe not immediately, prior to that in the 6 months, a year before, but even maybe if you go back a couple of years, if you would have said that somebody is listening to your phone calls, or and I don't think it's actually from the standpoint of, obviously the government can't technically listen, like sit there and every time somebody makes a phone call, but they can store all that data to access it whenever they want, not to mention all of these algorithms they can create to flag certain things. So, if people try to say, well, obviously they're not listening to your phone calls. Well, yeah, we know they're not technically listening to your phone call where they're taking it, we're listening to some phone sex here or something. But well, they might actually flag those, because what else they got to do? They're sitting there, entertaining themselves. But that's not the point. The point is they're storing all this data, and as systems get more sophisticated and they're able to flag things based on more and more sophisticated methods, they'll have that along with the fact that they can use it against you anytime they want. If they want to target somebody, they can go find all their information and find all their data and then use that against them. So just the fact that the data alone is being taken, again, doesn't mean that, they'll ever look at it. But the fact is that they can if they want to.
Yeah. And, this has a really simple solution. Again, easier said than done, for many. But this whole thing has the entire, everything about the Snowden revelations has an exceptionally simple solution. And that is to perhaps think back to when there was no Foursquare, when there was no, a lot of the social media and stuff like that. And somehow you were pretty much just as happy. And while
when people literally played Foursquare with a ball and squares.
Yeah, exactly. And the point is that if people stopped feeding them the information, this is where, again, like I mentioned earlier, you have the surveillance state, but this is where the surveillance society comes into play. And that is that the surveillance society just feeds all of this to them. Willy-nilly. They have no concern whatsoever, and it just keeps tossing it up with no concern. And so I think that if people, because it's important to keep this in mind too, is that a lot of people I think today would say that, oh man, if I didn't have my smartphone, I don't know what I'd do. And I think they're pretty serious when they say that. And I understand it's very useful, very helpful in a lot of ways. I get it. But at the same time, to say somehow, how long have we had smartphones? Like really good smartphones. It's been since since the iPhone was originally released, and that was back in 06, 07 or whatever. Okay, so not even a decade yet, to where smartphones are the norm, or the quote unquote norm. But a decade's not normal for anything. Like, I mean, there's no. This is like it's funny. The best example I like to use for this are for people who complain about how, boy, you just when I go to the grocery store, they want me to use these reusable bags instead of using the plastic bags or the paper bags. What happened to the good old days when we had plastic bags and paper bags? What good old days? How long have there been supermarkets? Not even 100 years. You know what I mean? And so how quickly people accept things as normal is an issue. There's no need to say that somehow smartphones are normal. The future could look completely different. I mean, even, when you take the case of like Bitcoin, even gold is honestly challenged by the very, gold's value is challenged by the existence of Bitcoin. There is no, there's no normal. And certainly less than a decade is not something for normal. So I think if people, just maybe changed their habits, you're not going to get rid of the technology. You're not going to stop, the forward advancement of technology unless something really terrible happens that you wouldn't want to happen. Okay, but if you just changed your relationship with the technology, what you put up there, I think, the NSA could become powerless in no time.
Right. Well,
go ahead.
Sorry. Well, you look at, now kids are born and their whole life is put online from the moment they're a baby. You got the parents taking pictures and putting everything up there, and they did this and they did that. And so they're going to have this data on people, and they don't even have a choice in it either. But yeah, it's putting all this stuff up there. I mean, I haven't even actually had, Facebook. I didn't even get for a while, and then finally it was, well, my cousins wanted me to get it so I could, communicate with them. Okay. And then I got to a point where it's like, okay, I'm only using this to promote the ideas of liberty in my show, and that's it.
Right.
There's nothing else I put on there. Sometimes, my fiance will post something and tag me or whatever. But besides that, there is nothing I put on there that's not related to that. I mean, there are some pictures, but that's more... most of them are from her, but then whatever, put a couple pictures up there. But I mean, everything else is something to do with an article or my show or commenting on something, because I'm not going to give them all this information. And really, what's the point? What's the purpose? So so I can, in a way, it's kind of arrogant to an extent, because you think about the people that are posting some of this ridiculous stuff. I mean, I think it's good, you want to share pictures with a bunch of people. Okay, that makes sense. But this, especially with Twitter, well, I'm going here now. I'm eating this. I mean, like, who gives a fuck what you're doing anyway? The NSA does, but you think that you have this self-importance that everybody cares about what you're doing, I guess, and you want this kind of, everyone's a celebrity on the internet now, I guess.
Right, and there's a lot in that. You're absolutely right, and you highlight the point in that you have a goal with what you're doing with it, and that's the thing. You've changed or at least from the onset, maybe you had a different relationship with this stuff than what the average person does, and that's what I'm saying. It's so easy. You don't even have to go delete your Facebook account. Just change your relationship with it. Change the way you use it. Don't feed them everything, and that's. It's an interesting point, too, that a lot of people don't consider, is that, we were talking earlier about how, children deserve a whole lot more respect than I think, or, a whole lot of better role models, perhaps, than what they're getting. And what they're also receiving is that, no, my life, can go ahead and be up in lights and all this stuff. They're, parents, I don't see them really taking a hard enough charge, a hard enough, a stewardship to where they're saying, well, this is a picture of my son. Maybe my son in the future wouldn't like it if that picture was up there. Maybe I shouldn't post it on Facebook. People don't think about it these ways because it all got put on them so quickly that they don't really take the time to contemplate, what is actually a good idea, when interacting with a lot of these online services and whatever. So again, it really is so easy to put a stop to a lot of what the NSA is doing, and that is just to completely change the way that you interact with all of these online services and whatever. And another thing about this, or did you have? Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Well,
I was just
sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say the other thing with celebritydom. This is a real issue, is like a lot of these people are becoming, because it's no cost to anybody other than, an internet connection. And even that, if you're connecting at McDonald's, who cares, to have a Facebook account or a Twitter account or a Google Plus or whatever. And people are becoming celebrities. They really are. Like they're becoming, where they're getting thousands of followers, for whatever various reasons. But that's kind of a concern too, because, 20 years ago, a celebrity, because what's happening is a lot of these people are becoming very famous. They don't have the means within which to really protect themselves from from the possible dangers that celebritydom brings with it. And as to where 20 years ago, when you were a celebrity, usually you ended up with a ton of money and you could hire bodyguards and all this stuff. And so I think a lot of like this mass celebritydom, first off comes from a healthy place, I think. Not saying that there's anything wrong with being a celebrity, but just I think a lot of people want it because, they have some kind of lifestyle obsession. But at the second point,
some people have issues, like personal issues where, it's I want the world to love me, or I feel unloved or something like that. Right. As well, or something's lacking there where they felt unloved by their parents or something, and they need the attention.
Sure. But a lot of this, comes at a real cost of not paying attention to one's own, like real inside personal growth, not this, because that's the other thing too, is that a lot of, Facebook, what goes on Facebook and Twitter and Google Plus, it's all filtered. It's not even real. Like you mentioned, it was a great point you made, Dave, about, how reality TV shows that's all editing. Well, so is all these social networks. They're all editing. That's not, you're getting the best times, from people. It's like, oh, look at this picture of me on the beach. And it's like, well, that didn't show you, 5 hours before having diarrhea in the bathroom. It's
hopefully
really,
you're not posting that, but some people are.
Right, but that's the thing. But otherwise, what is everybody thinking? Everybody thinks, oh, you're having this, lavish time. When no, your life sucks or is, relatively normal compared to everybody else's. So it creates very skewed perspectives on life. And I don't think people are prepared to handle what comes off, what are the consequences of that.
Well, there's also the status for, you're famous for nothing, like the reality stars. They're famous for doing nothing, at least, years ago. Okay, well, you're an actress or a writer or musician, or you're doing something at least that you're getting fame from, whereas now you have these people that really they're just famous for nothing.
Yeah, that's it. You're absolutely right.
And the thing I wanted to bring up earlier was I think to a certain extent you can definitely do some of these things where you're not putting this information out there, and it's not as you're saying, it's not hard to do. People are just thinking now, like, oh my God, I can't post that I just went to the mall on Facebook or something. Like, it's a huge thing in their life that they can't do, but I think there is, to a certain extent, there's things that you can avoid, like the cameras that are everywhere, or now, they have these chips in cars that are supposed to record information, and GPSs where they can locate your car wherever they want. So I think, regarding the internet, definitely. I mean, you can just say, well, fuck it, I'm not going to use the internet, period, and there goes that right there. But there are a certain amount of things that really, unless you want to barricade yourself in your house and build some kind of bunker where nobody can see in, there's a certain level of invasion of privacy by government.
Yeah, and that's where you got to be careful, because I think people can take it too far. There's an old saying from when this is back in the late 90s, that the most secure computer is the one that you turned off and threw out the window. And it's still kind of true, okay? But at the same time, you do that and you lose a lot of creative power, you lose a lot of productive power, you lose, all kinds of things that could really help you, personally. So again, it's important, because I think a lot of people would want to do that, where, I'm amazed that I still have listeners. I figured they would have all ran off to go live in caves, and do hunter-gathering again after listening to my show for long enough, because, I mean, things are just so nuts. Privacy's, just seemingly gone. It feels like often enough. But you don't want to get there, because at the same time, one of the things I think that people really can do and that technology enables, even though I think that the underlying core of the technology does need a change to where it allows for privacy and anonymity, but it allows you to connect with people, and wherever you happen to be. And I think that's one of the real paths to getting like genuine freedom in your life is intentional communities, to where you find 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 people. It doesn't have to be a whole lot of people, and you just get together, and maybe you all go and buy a city block, or not, maybe a bunch of houses out, on some town or whatever, and you get to live together, and you can live in, relative freedom. Like, you're like 99% there. It just so happens that the U.S. government, still kind of exists. So you don't want to miss on the chance to really reach out to people at the same time. But you just again, like I said, just change the relationship with a lot of these, mediums of information. That's all.
And there's, I know, different applications that you can use to try to limit the amount of invasion of privacy, or to increase your security, like the
absolutely.
Like, I know ProXPN was one of them, and I have private internet access, I think it's called.
Yep, they're good.
That's where it communicates out to another server and puts their IP out there as opposed to yours, right? Or you could probably explain that obviously a lot better.
Yeah, that's a VPN, and that's a really good thing to have. It's a virtual private network. What that does is it encrypts your data that you send up to the internet from your computer, and it does it at the computer, so it's getting encrypted at the right spot, before it goes anywhere else. And then what it does is it communicates with, before you go to any other website on the internet, or you go to any other service or whatever, it communicates with that service or website from a different location than where you actually are. So it hides your location. Is the end game of it, and that's a really handy thing to have. And especially, if you're in a country where a lot of services are blocked, that's the only way you're going to be able to use them. Like, I mean, if you're in China, in China, using Facebook, ironically, is a rebellious thing, as to where in the U.S. I'd say not using Facebook is the real rebellion.
Yeah.
Okay, but in China, if you want to use Facebook, you got to go through VPN, because you got to mask where you're coming from to be able to access it. And that's what a VPN does. That's a great thing. And there's a lot of good chat apps. Like, there's Telegram, which is probably the best one out there right now. That allows you to securely, essentially text message each other. There's Text Secure. There's a whole slew of really great apps.
Yeah,
but
I got that. I think Text Secure.
Yep. That one's really good. Yeah. So a lot of these things are coming, but in ways it feels like it's too little, too late. But I'm glad they're here, and they should be used. To at least do something, to thwart the surveillance state, if anything, because I think anybody can make a case, and you get any security researcher on any show, and they'll talk to you about the problems that exist in, you name the software, or VPN, or whatever, doesn't matter. But if anything, just make it expensive for the NSA, make it expensive for the FBI. I mean, if you
it makes it harder. It makes it harder for them to get that data. It's not going to stop them if they really want it. But and then if they're doing things like, I guess if it's something where they're not targeting you specifically, but, maybe not putting effort into it, but they're collecting data, and maybe I'm not giving a good example here, but just the point being that if they're not trying real hard, they won't just be able to, just scoop up your data without, having to specifically target you and putting some effort into it.
Yeah, make them work for it. That's all. I mean, be the thorn in the side. There's and it's so easy now because these apps are so easy to use. There's no reason not to. Like, there's no good reason not to use it as compared to using, the more mainstream services, in my opinion. So they might as well. So I'm glad that that's happening, that these things are out there.
So, and in your opinion, and you keep up with all this stuff, and I just know a little from seeing, different articles and different things that the government's doing. And as you said, I mean, it seems it's just pretty far out there.
Sure.
I mean, what can you really do? And I brought up off here, anti-technology, that every technology, someone can invent some anti-technology to, and I guess that's an example of it, where the, IP cloaking or whatever is kind of an example of, I guess, anti-technology. But is it to the point, because I mean, when I look at a lot of this stuff or hear some of the things that government is doing, it seems like it's to the point where it's, I don't know that there, is anything that can be done even on a higher level, other than, I guess, get rid of government and stop them just from having any of the power, control, and money to do it. But it seems like they have gone pretty far, and that's just based on the stuff that even comes out, never mind all the things that we just don't know about. So I guess, what's your opinion on, like, how far they've really gone, and what kind of privacy do you have, if any?
Well, that's okay. So I'll make this twofold. One is that how far they've really gone, I challenge people. I bring this as a favorite case example of mine is it's what's called a mosquito drone. And there's a popular site on the internet called Snopes that you can go to, and it's a debunking site. It's like, well, if you hear some kind of crazy story, is it really true? And you go to Snopes and you can find out if it's true or not. And if you go there and you look up mosquito drones, you're going to end up with inconclusive. They don't know, they can't prove it exists, but then they can't prove that it doesn't exist either. And this is the problem, is that you have, a mosquito drone is literally a drone controlled by an agency that is the size of a mosquito. And, all the encryption technology in the world means nothing if you have a camera looking at you from behind, okay, to see what you're typing or whatever, or, record your voice or whatever. Okay, and so is that something that I'm open to the fact that it exists? Oh yeah, I'm definitely open to something like that existing. Of course, one would argue its limitation is how big of a battery could you put in something in the size of a mosquito? It probably only lasts so long. Yeah, maybe, but it might be enough. So in that regard, and considering the fact that things like the NSA and the FBI and others have a seemingly unlimited budget, it does all seem pretty grim. But, at the same time, what you are getting is now, thanks to Bitcoin proving a lot of things, thanks to a lot of these new peer-to-peer, what they call peer-to-peer technologies, like BitTorrent and stuff like that, it's really proving that the way the Internet exists, which is really fostering the surveillance state, that's the tough pill to swallow, is that the Internet in and of itself is allowing a lot of this to happen. The Internet does not have to work that way. The way we communicate each other with people all around the world does not have to operate in the way that we think of now. And it's already proven. Bitcoin is a proof of that, because that essentially works very differently from what is known as the server model of the Internet, which means that it has to go to some server, which of course the NSA can subpoena, and the FBI, or can send a letter to, give me all your info and all this. Okay, and then you have also a really exciting technology called MadeSafe, and I think you can go to madesafe.net, or madesafe.com to look that up, and it's MAIDSAFE, and this is literally a distributed, decentralized Internet, meaning it doesn't exist on servers. It doesn't, it only exists in a peer-to-peer structure, meaning that all of the data you pretty much. I'll try to put this into like layman's terms, but where everything's encrypted for starters. So you've got that encryption, which is really key, that the Internet just doesn't have. But you would give up such and so much of your hard drive space, and then all this data, like everything. Just picture what you normally do with the Internet, YouTube and all this stuff, and storing things online, and even social networking and all that. And all of that doesn't get shared to servers that the NSA can record from, but it just gets shared in bits and pieces on everybody's computer. Okay, and this is peer to peer, and it's a really exciting new way for things to get done, and it allows. Just by its very nature, the fact that it's decentralized, and there isn't a central point of failure for it to go to, allows for a lot of anonymity and privacy that even the NSA is going to have a really hard time trying to take any information from. So the caveat is that it seems hopeless, but at the same time, because of the Snowden revelations and some people being very concerned about the privacy all around the world, that technologies to thwart all of it are coming and are very close to fruition. I mean, as in like coming in the next few months. So there's hope.
So I guess that's kind of, when I'm saying anti-technology, and it not necessarily have to specifically combat something. I think that's more of what I meant by anti-technology. But yeah, I guess at the same time, other types of technology that can make some of the technology that assists in the surveillance state irrelevant as well. And that seems like that's something that would do that in that case. So how would that, without going into, I guess, too much detail, but how would that work if you have a website? How would that work?
With MadeSafe, you mean what I was talking about?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if you have a website, it really would work very similar to what you do now. Just the difference being is that you wouldn't have, like, say the government wanted your website taken down as things stand on the internet. Okay, which isn't outlandish. I mean, we see YouTube channels get taken down, things like that, and they wanted your website. Very simple process. The government would, they'd either go take down the server themselves, like with Silk Road, or they would, send a letter to a hosting service or a DNS service where your website gets stored, and say, you need to take this site down, or we're going to send in the big guns. And generally, the hosting service will take the site down, because obviously they don't want to deal with the government. Who would, but with MadeSafe, the thing is that when they say, hey, take this down, there's no central point to, point the gun at, to say, or to point the force at to have your site taken down. So that's really the difference there, is that it's distributed in that there isn't one area where you'd have to shut down the entire network, to make that happen. Now, could they shut down the entire network? Maybe, but probably not, because again, where do you shut it down? If you want to shut down the internet, okay, there's so many millions of servers that you would have to turn off, but you could potentially do it. But if you wanted to shut down a network like MadeSafe, where it's peer-to-peer and it's distributed and decentralized, you'd have to literally turn off every computer on the planet. And that's really it. So you're getting rid of these central points of failure, which is really the way to solve just about any problem, not just a technological problem.
Right. And then, well, of course, one of the other things that I had brought up earlier, and I think this kind of goes to something that you mentioned, is that, again, along with the internet, you also have all of these other things that they use in the surveillance state. But it seems like really the only way, and I guess kind of to your point that how they have unlimited amounts of money, would be to stop that aspect of government obviously extorting all this money from people, having these unlimited budgets, and being able to use this money for all this stuff. And it's ridiculous when you hear people talk about that more tax money is needed, that the quote-unquote rich need to be taxed more to bring in more money. And regardless, I guess, of how you think about, what tax rate the rich should be. I mean, I don't think anybody obviously should be taxed, but
right on.
To sit there and say, oh well, it's not enough. The $4 trillion that they're bringing in, and of course that's not enough, but they need to bring in more money when all of these things are being spent, or all this money is being spent on all this stuff. And how much do you think that going back to, I guess, 9/11, and not just 9/11, but all the a lot of propaganda after that and trying to push all this stuff as well contributed to people just accepting it? And it's not just with, say, surveillance. It's, you got cops in schools now. You have all the military vehicles that the police have. you have all of these things that contribute to it as well that people just seem to accept. They accept the fact that, elementary schools go on lockdown when, a house a couple miles away, there's a standoff with the police because someone's going to hurt themselves and they lock themselves in their house. What that has to do with a elementary school 2 miles away and they have a SWAT team there, at the house, I have no idea. But to me, well, I guess I do. It's to keep pushing that whole, along with the surveillance state, the whole police state, government control. I guess it's really just about government control over every aspect of your life, and there's different pieces that go into that. One, being the surveillance state. But going back to I guess my question is, in your opinion, how much of it is from that and the change in people's views towards that, whereas where you're bringing up, your example with Radio Shack, where people say, well, I don't want to give my address and phone number, and I'm just buying something. Yeah. And now it seems more people are accepting.
Yeah, well, you have to create boogeymen. And I know what this is like. I was in psychological operations. We had to create narratives. We had to, sometimes create situations that sometimes weren't even necessarily real. For these people in other countries to accept the fact that, hey, the U.S. troops are here. And that, people don't realize this. I think it was in 91 or 92, there was a bill getting passed, or attempting to get passed, and they had a lot of favor. It was a really good chance of this getting passed. And this bill was to shut down the CIA. And it almost went through. That's the thing, is that, I think that what happened is this incredible era of, economic prosperity was occurring in the 80s, and kind of dovetailing into the 90s. And people they stopped being afraid. The boogeymen were gone. It's like, no, life is good. Let's do this. And so I think that the narrative, the government, kind of had to, and this might sound conspiratorial to some, but I'll admit it's largely theory. But I think they had to create boogeymen. They had to create a narrative, whether real or not, to get people to be afraid and to think that they still need these things. Imagine that. Imagine the fact that we could have, for the past 25 years, there could have been no CIA. Essentially 9/11 could have never occurred, if we didn't have the CIA, because of blowback and things like that, which the CIA itself admits is part and parcel of that problem. And that's really something to consider, that the world could be that way. But now here's the problem. In that controlling of the narrative, now it's far, far worse, because when people use, Google and Facebook and Twitter, these all go through algorithms, like you were mentioning before. And they go through and these algorithms push upon you what they want you to see, or at least what they think will get you to perhaps buy something. In fact, a really common case I use, because I run a tech show, and so I have to test out a lot of these new technologies, even though, I really, and I am concerned about my privacy, I'd never use them, if I was wanting to be, private. But one popular service is Google Now, where it filters to you what it thinks is important information based upon your activities and what you look up on the internet and read about throughout the day. I've never, and this is, I type in anarchism and liberty more than any other words, in the English language, and I never once get fed a story on Google Now about anarchy, and there's plenty of stories to go around, about liberty, about voluntarism. They never, ever pop up. And so that's the thing, is that this narrative, talk about having narrative control and about keeping people afraid, that and making them think that they need this protection from the NSA, the FBI, CIA, and whoever else. They've got it all sewn up, because you don't even know. If the average person goes online, they don't even know that this other stuff is going on. They don't even know about liberty. It's getting literally filtered out. Unless you know the actual .com address, you're screwed. A lot of times. You type in Free Talk Live in Google, you're going to end up with Free Talk Live. You type in libertarian, you type in voluntarism, you're going to end up with some stuff. But as far as what you get fed to you through the algorithms, no, it's never going to get to you. And so that's pretty, on that end, it's kind of disconcerting. But not enough people. Again, there's tech shows. Tech shows are really popular today because technology's popular. People love Apple. People love Google. They love Android and their iPhone and all this. But none of these tech guys out there are bothering to say this. They're not sharing this information that, hey, maybe these algorithms are a bad freaking idea. And so that's pretty unfortunate. I hope that answers the question. I don't know if it did, but.
No, I mean, I totally even forgot what my question was in the first place. Yeah. But as I was listening, like, what was my original question there? But one of the things as well, and I use actually Start Page because it doesn't. Although I think it gives you Google results, but it's anonymous results. But still, I think things would still be filtered out that way probably. But it won't adapt to, how you're saying that whoever the person is, as you're entering stuff into Google, it's gonna, try to give you certain things as well as filter things out in general. So it's going to adapt to that, and just how everything's trying to, every site in every app is pushing the personalization. So again, as you're saying, you're only going to get these certain things, whether it's, based on adapting to preferences or partially adapting to preferences and then just not giving you certain things, trying to control that narrative. And what I call government media, I guess, it is I think a good example of that, because they do it manually. So people don't look at the fact that, normally it's, they'll look at how a story is presented and look at it that way. But what I think many people don't realize is it's just as much about what they report on and what they don't report on than even how they present the story, because they're choosing what stories to present. So just by doing that alone, they're creating a narrative and shaping opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely something that's been, I've heard it said a lot, is to listen to what they don't say, or listen for what they don't say. That's as important as what they're saying, when you hear that. And it's ironic, because I think that's what a lot of people feel the internet is, or at least was it got rid of the gatekeepers of knowledge. It just put knowledge out there wide open. But now, with a lot of these larger companies, and of course, they're shaking hands with governments all over the place, they have become gatekeepers themselves. Google has not opened up the internet, it's closing it down. It's making you see what they want you to see. And this isn't, I think people would think that sounds nuts, but no, it's in their own mission statement, that they want to feed to you what they think is important to you. But it's what they think is what's important to you, not what you think is important to you. Okay, I mean, so it's not like, this information's out in the open. Yahoo does it, Amazon does it, Apple does it, Microsoft does it. All these big companies do it. So the gatekeepers are back, and you can't. If knowledge isn't free, you're sure as hell never going to be free, because where are you going to even find it? Where are you going to find that freedom? So it's pretty terrifying, and really, I think at the end of the day, it's like I said, it's time for perhaps another internet. But the good thing is that's being developed, like I mentioned, MadeSafe, and there's a lot of other technologies out there right now where they are building, forms of intercommunication that the internet provides, but these won't have gatekeepers. And I think that's so key. We got to have that knowledge out there and available.
Definitely, and that's again, even the ability to do what I'm doing right now. It's definitely, as you mentioned earlier, you could just throw your computer out the window, but you're losing so much by that. And
sure.
Definitely the things that you can do with the internet and the information, but if it's more where it's harder to get that information, which it seems like that's what they're trying to do, and to filter certain things out and try to create those narratives, it kind of counteracts that to a certain extent. It still comes down to just as you're saying, with the peer-to-peer stuff and being decentralized. It's the same thing with applying that to the government. And I think no matter what, as long as there is a government that is in power and people who have rule over others, that we're always going to have these issues. And to me, again, the fact that people aren't outraged, if you think about what they're doing, this is something you would expect from any tyrannical nation in history, whether you want to, talk about communist nations or Germany, Nazi Germany or whatever.
Right.
But somehow, because it's done through technology or something, or just because people have gotten so used to it, it's not, a big a deal. But when you really think about what they're doing, it's crazy that people just kind of, sit there and accept it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it does go back to, as long as there's these rulers in power that are extorting all this money, there's things I guess you can do. But the thing that they have to their advantage, as you mentioned earlier, they have an unlimited budget. So they have that ability to, they have that huge advantage over anybody else.
Sure.
Because unless I guess if all liberty people got together and said, okay, instead of paying taxes to the government, well, I guess you'd be creating the same thing though. But we're going to fund. Well, it would be by choice and say, hey, we're going to fund our own projects, and we're going to do, which people are doing, where they're doing it through donations and stuff like that. But still, you're still never going to have the budget that the government has, and we're all supplying that, I guess.
Right. No, you're right. But at the same time, that's the key to where like cryptocurrencies come in, where like Bitcoin and NXT and some of these other cryptocurrencies out there. This is where they come in, because then, you can, because part of the problem is that, you got to keep paying your taxes. Yeah, you got to keep, you got to buy stuff. And so you have to use their money, but now that's not necessary anymore. Now it's shown that people can decide to use an alternative currency that doesn't back anything crazy, that doesn't back governments at all, unless, of course, somehow government, starts accepting Bitcoin or whatever. Certainly they're trying to tax it to some degree, but at the rate at which Bitcoin is developing and improving, they're going to have a hell of a time doing that. So that's the thing, is that technology really does, and that's why I say you don't want to just toss your computer out the window just yet, because a lot of technologies are getting developed that just completely circumvent and ignore everything that the government's trying to do, including their unlimited funding. It's actually, it's getting away from that. And I wonder too, and this is just something I kind of theorize from time to time, is that if Liberty people did actually like really get together, as in physically get together, and they went and lived over here, but they didn't really announce it, like the Free State Project, everybody can know everybody knows the Free State Project's here. Okay.
Right.
But maybe if they move, if a bunch of people moved over here and they just didn't say anything, and if they did not interact with Facebook, with all of these different things that the NSA is using to really spy on people, I wonder if it wouldn't be like a cataract in the eye of Sauron. If it wouldn't be like a blind spot, because they might become. Because that's the thing, is that government really is inept at the end of the day, in my opinion. The amount of actual brains they have there are incredibly few, and I wonder if people did perhaps again either stop or at least change the relationship with the way they use social media and things like this, if they would suddenly just kind of disappear off the map without doing anything, and then they could live in relative peace, other than the fact, of course, yes, property taxes would get paid, I suppose. Okay, but by and large, I think technology in the end can really allow for quite a bit of freedom, and it may even allow for a lot of loopholes in the system that far outweigh whatever existed before. So so again, even with all of this terrible stuff going on, I'm still pretty hopeful.
And I'm glad you brought up Bitcoin, because we only have about 10 minutes left, but that's something I wanted to bring up. as well. So for people that aren't familiar with Bitcoin, can you give a basic explanation as to what it is and how it can be used and how it benefits liberty?
Okay, absolutely. So Bitcoin, the easiest way to of Bitcoin is that it is digital gold. It is gold digitized. It is not based on, it's not literally based upon gold as in gold backs it, but that's the easiest way to consider it. And so it has, there's only Bitcoin, there's only so many Bitcoins that'll ever be created. I think it's like 21 million or whatever. And so you have scarcity like gold has, and it runs off of a distributed network like we were talking about, where it's peer-to-peer, where it's it's interacted between the amount of people that have the Bitcoin software downloaded, and it works like also as much as it's digital gold, it can work essentially like digital cash, to where you make a payment with if you have so many Bitcoin, you can pay for something with that Bitcoin. And lots of businesses, Newegg, there's a whole slew of online businesses, and even not online businesses, or not businesses that operate off their website anyway, do accept Bitcoin for payment. I buy all kinds of things, clothes and food and whatever else with Bitcoin all the time. You can even buy plane tickets. You can buy hotel rooms, with Bitcoin. So it's, at a really basic level, it's digital cash. But here's the kicker, is that the banks didn't come up with it. Okay, governments around the world didn't come up with it, or at least we don't think they did. There's some people that would say it's all a big conspiracy. But in any case, as we know it, they did not invent this. And so it doesn't serve any countries or any financial institutions' interests at this time. And that's the real beauty of it. And the thing is that you can make your own coin if you wanted. And so for the liberty movement, because I think some people would say, well, Bitcoin's going to get taken over by the government or whatever, well, then make your own, make another one, and you can have your alternative economy, which again, that kind of goes back to partly what I was talking about with intentional communities, where you can have literally a parallel system, a parallel world, that you interact and trade and do economic things with and buy and sell, all the stuff you normally do within that. That's what Bitcoin does. It's money for the internet.
And I know, of course, one of the among others benefits is, if you leave the country, of course, when you go through customs, they're going to want to you to report all your money and essentially tax you for bringing money out of the country if they allow you to do it in the first place. There was a woman who was actually just pretty much robbed by customs leaving the country with a bunch of cash. And we're not going to charge you with a crime. We're just going to take your cash. So there's stories of that as well, but you can go anywhere and, of course, still, use it from wherever you're at and don't have to go through, you still got to go through customs, but not with your money per se, not your Bitcoin like you would with cash. So, because same thing, if you have a debit card or something, it's still, the transactions are going to show up. So it's not like you can do the same thing. Well, I have a card here. So it's not the same thing where you have to go through banks like you would with debit cards or credit cards.
And that's the real beauty for me about Bitcoin and other things like it, is that it is really the very first financial instrument that you really do own. It is not, it doesn't belong to the U.S. government. It doesn't belong to J.P. Morgan. It doesn't belong, you take your pick of who it belongs to, and its value is based upon what other people value. Okay, and so that's really the shocking thing that I don't think a lot of people really grasp, is that you never really, your money can just be taken. No one's taking your Bitcoin. In fact, with Bitcoin, you can create what's called a brain wallet, where it's a string of words that you have in your head, and you have your Bitcoin, it's just in your head. but like it still has value to other people. And it doesn't matter if people think, well, I can't hold it in my hand, so it's not real. That's nonsense. If you can get something with it, it's real. And you can get something with Bitcoin. And so, yeah, I mean, this is the one thing that you finally really own that allows you to trade and interact and do voluntary interactions with other human beings with a medium of exchange. It's incredible. Yeah, it really is. The world hasn't seen this in thousands of years.
Yeah, and I think whether it's, from what I understand, I mean, whether it's Bitcoin or something else, sure. I guess the seeds are there of the concept of,
exactly.
The cryptocurrency. It doesn't mean, necessarily that will be the future. It may be, but at least the concept will, be there, and people will continue to improve upon it. And I believe as they have, that there were some, I don't know enough about if it was Bitcoin or just certain patches or stuff like that it might have been more on the mining or wallets or something like that. But I know there were some certain issues here or there that were fixed. And that, of course, as you said, with people creating their own, there's a lot of other people creating their own as well. So you have a lot of these other cryptocurrencies, which is good also, because again, I think maybe that will help to continue to improve upon it and all the things you can do with it and ways to transfer money and pay for things and just all of those things.
Yeah, I think you raise a great point, because I personally, I don't think Bitcoin is necessarily the future. I think it'll be the easiest way to buy whatever the future is. Okay, but I think it'll end up being something else. But the point is that the idea, and I've heard about it at Bitcoin meetups, which is where people who are interested in Bitcoin, they kind of get together, and talk and have dinner or whatever, where people have said, this whole Bitcoin thing, I just realized we don't need banks. I mean, and to hear that from, just normal everyday people suddenly come to the realization that they don't need to deal with banks, and then eventually it turns into, hey, well, yeah, we don't even need governments because I got money right here and it's between you and me and, and all of this. I mean, that's the real beauty of it, is the fact that it plants a seed, like you said, in people's heads that you don't have to do business the way the government tells you to do business.
Right, and of course the most important thing, as you said, getting government and banks out of it. But we only got about a minute left, so anything that you, like a minute 50, but anything, where can people find your show?
Oh, please, yes, go to sovryntech.com, and that's SOVRYN tech.com, and that'll take you right to the page, and you can listen to, good hundreds of episodes, so...
All right. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for coming on. Really, really enjoyed it.
Oh, this was great, Dave. Thank you so much.
All right. And that was Brian Sovryn. Again, check out his show, Sovryn Tech. And I think that's something in general that people need to at least be aware of to a certain extent of what's going on. So the things that you can try to combat, like, the ProXPN or these VPN programs or whatever, to try to maintain whatever level of privacy you can, is a positive thing. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in. If you missed any of the show, again, go to blogtalkradio.com/nonpartisan liberty for all. You can get the archives. Thanks again to Brian. I really enjoyed having him on the show. And don't forget to tune in tomorrow to hear, I'm like falling asleep now. It's getting late. I didn't get enough sleep last night. To Dale Brown from the Detroit Threat Management Center. We'll be talking to him tomorrow, so be sure to tune in for that. Thanks, everybody.
You just experienced Sovryn Tech. Go to sovryntech.com, that's SOVRYN tech.com, and connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovryn Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, And love is not subject to law. So please, share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.